It's time.
What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive here on this sunny Monday afternoon. Scotty Scheffler is your PGA champion at Quail Hollow after winning by a whopping 5 strokes. Just another day at the office for the best golfer in the world. Eagles coach Nick Sirianni has cashed in on his Super Bowl win as the Eagles signed him to a multi-year contract extension. 49ers linebacker Fred Warner is the highest paid linebacker for the second time in his career after agreeing to a 3-year, $63 million extension. The NBA Conference Finals are set and will get underway tomorrow with the Oklahoma City Thunder and Minnesota Timberwolves squaring off in OKC. Indiana and New York will start the Eastern Finals on Wednesday. Coming up on the big show, we got a jam-packed 3 hours for you guys. A little bit of everything today. We'll be catching up with Ryan Harlan from Beaver's Edge, talking some Oregon State baseball. Keith Smith from Spotrac, talking some NBA. And Dave Coleman talking some golf. You got the Rip City Drive.
It's time for the Rip City Drive. Brought to you by Goldberg Jones. Divorce for Men. Call 1-800-DIVORCE. Featuring the crazy and often irrational longtime Portland radio vet, Chad Dewing.
Driving and kicking, right wing to Dub, open. Snaps off a rainbow three from the wing. Hitting it under money ball. OKC knocks down at 4-3 at a half and leads by 6, its largest lead. Drives and kicks left wing to Dub. He wants 3. It's online. Give it to him. Cha-ching at Thunder money ball. And those are finishing touches, baby. Thunder get 24 from Dub. Shea now has 4 assists, and they lead at 111-76. 125-93. Pickett across the timeline with 10. Apparently will dribble it out. It is 7th heaven in Oklahoma City. The young Thunder have persevered through the stiff challenge Denver has offered, punching their ticket to the Western Conference Finals. Oklahoma City's historic season continues as it readies for its first conference championship best-of-7 series against Minnesota, upcoming since 2016.
The king of golf conquers the Queen City at Quail Hollow. Scotty Scheffler is a PGA champion.
Strap in. The Rip City Drive with Chad Dewing starts now.
Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you guys. Hope you all have had a good weekend. We got a lot of sports to dive into today. And also, man, what a good opening song there from producer Michael Shacker. Man, that takes me back. Lincoln Park in the end. Oh, just middle school memories all over the place. Again, good to be with you guys. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Last time I chatted with you was Friday afternoon. At the time, a lot's changed in the sports world since then. As we heard in our open, Scotty Scheffler did Scotty Scheffler things at Quail Hollow. Shouldn't surprise anybody. He is just the man, and I'm very excited to catch up with Dave Coleman in Hour 3. And you guys are going to love this. Dave has a NBA team comparison to Scotty Scheffler. He texted me when we were talking about this spot coming up, and he's like, Brendan, Scotty Scheffler is like blank blank. And I'm like, man, that's apt. So I'm very excited. Make sure to stay tuned for Hour 3 to hear from Dave Coleman. We also got Ryan Harlan coming up here in about 15 minutes. Very excited to talk to Ryan, my guy down at beaversedge.com in Corvallis. Ryan was at the baseball game this weekend as Oregon State wrapped up the sweep of Long Beach State. Want to get his thoughts on what he saw for the Beavers down the stretch. Obviously, want to get his thoughts on the upcoming postseason, the national seed likelihood, how that could shake out. So Beaver fans definitely be intrigued for that segment. And then in the 4 o'clock hour, we're going to catch up with Keith Smith, one of my favorite people to talk to in the business. Keith is as connected as anybody is in the NBA, and want to get his thoughts on how the conference semifinals ultimately shook out, his thoughts on the conference finals. We'll maybe even get Keith's kind of national perspective on the Blazers as well. Want to, see if there's any more than anything with Keith, again, as we mentioned, Keith very plugged in with the news of the NBA. And, Keith obviously had a front row seat to watch, the Boston Celtics go through their sale process, and obviously was, in around as the Hornets were sold, and in addition to the Mavericks. So the question I'm going to have for Keith is whether or not he might know of any of these so-called, quote, billionaires who may have ended up, second or third, right, for any of those teams in like the process, or if he's got any names that maybe be like, hey, keep an eye for this one. Or maybe it's out of left field, but nevertheless, the Blazers still being put up for sale is something very intriguing. I want to get his thoughts on as well. And then stay tuned, folks. We got Blazers Courtside tonight. So after we finish up the Rip City Drive, we'll have an hour talking Trailblazers tonight. We'll be looking at some potential possibilities for who they could draft with pick number 11. We're going to run through some mock drafts, see who we like. I'm going to throw out a few players. Curious to get your all's thoughts, too. 503-248-0620. We'll also catch up with the Godfather, Dwight Jaynes. I want to get his thoughts on the Blazers sliding back in the lottery, his thoughts on the team being put up for sale, and, similar thoughts as well as getting his thoughts on the conference finals as well. So a lot to get into on today's show, and, that's awesome for a Monday because, like I said, when we talked to you guys last on Friday, we were talking about a couple conference semifinal games, and last time I talked to you guys, we were talking about that Knicks game, that Game 6, and that's where we're going to start tonight. Knicks and Celtics. Obviously, the Knicks took the series 4-2, and, that's something that's going to make the Knicks fans very happy to be back in the Eastern Conference Finals. But, we talked about the possibility of Boston being able to push that series back to 7 after, they had won Game 5. That did not happen, folks. And again, just kind of recapping what happened over the weekend, Knicks get a 119-81 win. I mean, they blow out Boston in this game. It really wasn't even close. And I was a little surprised because, I know the Knicks were at home. I know the Knicks are a really good team, and the Knicks are, as good of a finals contender as any at this point with the Final Four left. But I really was like, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday, like that team could still do something. As it turns out, the Knicks' depth, the depth that they paid so many first-round picks for, so on and so forth, have just, you're seeing how it paid off here. Obviously, if Jason Tatum doesn't get hurt, I think this series is completely different. But nevertheless, the Knicks are able to do what I mentioned last Friday that you have to do if you're on your path to the champion, and that's you have to kill the king. And the Celtics were the king from the year before, and to win this convincingly, it was very, very impressive to me. Again, we mentioned not a lot working for the Celtics in this game. Jaylen Brown, had 20 points, but 8 of 20 shooting. Only other guys that got into double figures were Pritchard and Al Horford. That's not a recipe for success. Meanwhile, 4 of New York's 5 starters end up with 20 or more points. You also got 10 points from Josh Hart and 10 points from Miles McBride. So the Knicks are the real deal. I mean, for those who maybe were like, hey, I'll believe it when I see it with the Knicks, I think you're seeing it right now. And, it proves that if you go get players that fit and you stay healthy, that's, the big thing in the NBA is staying healthy. You've got as good of a chance as anybody. So I want to hear from Tom Thibodeau after the game, after they won the series. This is Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau.
You got to win games different ways. So every game's different. Then there's really no carryover from one game to the next other than you have to be ready to win that game that particular night and understand what you need to do in order to do that. And I think when you understand that part of it and you understand how important your preparation is, that gives yourself the best chance to win.
That was Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau after the win. We'll hear from Jalen Brunson here coming up in just a moment as well. But again, that's it. It's impressive to me to see because I was always really intrigued with Tom Thibodeau. You've heard all the good and bad, polarizing, I'd say, with Tom Thibodeau. The good being that he's some of the best defensive coaching in the NBA. This team, the grit, it seems to fit New York extremely well. But at the same token, he's also the coach who is known for running his players on massive minutes. And, you look at the rotation that they ran out against the Celtics, or that, that was just 7 deep, really. Some other guys ended up getting some minutes. But, I am impressed with what he's been able to do in New York. And, we'll talk a bit more about the Pacers-Knicks series, but I think they've got a great chance to advance. And, I think a part of that is, like I said, their depth. I think the move for Karl Anthony Towns was really, really good. We've seen what Towns has been able to do, in a competing situation. And I think it's also very interesting that is one of those rare trades that may have worked out good for both teams. I mean, we see Minnesota still here in the Final Four after trading Karl Anthony Towns. So, I think it proves that fit and roster fit really does matter in the NBA as far as what a coach is trying to do. And, I think there's a lot of things to, take away from this series. But after game 5, I really, really thought that Boston was going to force this back to game 7. It just looked like they had the mojo. But Jalen Brunson said it best. He's like, it was night and day difference for New York and from game 5 to game 6.
The whole day of game 5 just wasn't us. And we knew that. We reflected on it, and we came back. We knew that we needed to be ready, needed to be better. The way we prepared, the way we talked out there, the way we made it an emphasis to have each other's back and continue to cover for each other. It's focused on the defensive side of the ball, and when we're doing that, offense, we're flowing. And so we just got to focus on the little things, and we did that.
Again, Jalen Brunson, one of my favorite players. To think that at one point Dallas had not only Luka and Jalen Brunson, but it's amazing that Jalen Brunson goes to New York after kind of being a second star in Dallas and emerges into this star who is some of the most clutch players to watch. I absolutely love watching Jalen Brunson play, and you think about his journey. He works as hard as anybody, and even more rare. I know it kind of got thrown under the radar last year. This is a guy who took a sizable pay cut to keep the Knicks competitive, build a roster. You love those kind of guys because those kind of guys just don't exist in the NBA or in, professional sports. Dare I say there are a few outliers. There's the Tom Brady's, right, who are like, I'm going to take more to keep the team competitive. But when Jalen Brunson, I believe that was a year ago, turned down, I think it was something like $100 million more that he could have made just to keep the Knicks in a spot where they could be flexible, build depth. That's just unheard of, and I still don't think it's something that gets nearly enough credit. And, one thing definitely to root for the Knicks in that regard. So it's one of those really cool stories. Other side of the coin, the Celtics. This was a team who, lit the NBA on fire for a large part of the year. Their three-point shooting was something to be, to absolutely just be amazed at. But you kind of saw that, at least this series against the Knicks, they got down 0-2 and fought their way back. Tatum gets hurt. So, I still think that the Boston Celtics are some of, it depends on what Tatum being out for the next probable year, because I think it's very safe to say he probably won't play next year. That puts a damper on their window, but considering how young the team relatively is, Peyton Pritchard's still young, Derek White's not, particularly old. Drew Holiday's getting up there a little bit, but not even compared to like Al Horford. So the core of that team, Kristaps is still pretty young too. So, I think that team's going to be just fine. But the Celtics were they had some interesting comments post-game. We'll get to Jaylen Brown's kind of whoa comments here in a minute, but let's go ahead and hear from Joe Mazzulla real quick.
To me, it's more about the mindset and the process that the guys had throughout the season. I thought they gave everything they had. I thought they really went after it, trying to achieve something that's obviously extremely difficult. I thought they went after that, and when you go after something, this is the price you pay.
I really love that from Joe Mazzulla. We'll hear from Jaylen Brown a little bit later in the show because I do want to play that clip where Jaylen Brown was pretty adamant, saying that losing to the Knicks felt like death. But Joe Mazzulla is one of my favorite coaches, and I really like how he's like, this is the price you pay to be great in the NBA, and being great in the NBA requires sacrifice, all these number of things. So I was, why I wanted to see the Celtics win this series, if you were asking me as a fan. No problem with the Knicks advancing, and I really think that there's a lot to like about this year's Knicks squad, and definitely has a chance to kind of rally New York City for a big way. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com. We'll be talking some Beaver baseball. Can Oregon State be a national seed? Will Oregon State play Oregon in the postseason? These are the questions we're going to answer next. You got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here. Pleased to welcome on our next guest, Beaver's Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan, who covers football, basketball, baseball, pretty much anything that's got orange and black on it. Ryan is covering it. Ryan, what's going on, my friend? How you doing?
Doing good, Brendan. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah, man. Let's do a little behind-the-scenes radio here because I love to do it for people that don't know. I think I hit you up about this specific radio hit like a month ago, and we were originally going to do it on Friday of the last week. You had a concert to go to. First off, how was your concert, man? And let's tell the audience, who'd you go see?
The concert was great. Went by myself. I went to go see Goth Babe and Still Woozy on Friday, and then I came back from Eugene, and then covered baseball game on Saturday.
Oh,
so,
yeah. No, that was what that's what I was getting into next, my man, because Ryan went out, and I tell you, folks, he was like, I texted him, I'm like, oh, you got a concert tonight. I'm like, you sure you're good for the baseball game the next morning? Might be a quick turnaround. He's like, dude, I got it. And not only that, Ryan, that was obviously Oregon State's season finale. They win the series against Long Beach State in pretty good fashion. Overall, what were your thoughts on them wrapping up the regular season? It really seems like this year went by like that, man.
Well, yeah. I mean, part of that is also due to the fact that the Beavers only played 20 home games this year.
Right.
But on top of that, too, like with their performance in the final week, I think I was asked about this on Sunday. It's like, do you think the Beavers did enough to at least stay within the top 8 seed? And well, I mean, my first thoughts were initially going into this past week was, you got to sweep at least. So there is that. The Beavers did one of those things. And I think, too, you're going to need to get some help across the country as well, because with the lack of a conference tournament, you don't really have the ability to strengthen your RPI, your kind of resume as well on top of that. So there might need a little bit of help there. But if anything to take away from this past week, I'd say that the offense has finally gotten back into rhythm, able to at least, show that this is the Beaver baseball team that we're all used to seeing, playing that small ball, being aggressive on the bases, and also, too, on top of that, having dominant pitching as well. I mean, scoreless through 7 on Saturday for Kleinschmidt and Noah Ferguson. So you can't ask for anything better in that entire week. And speaking of Ferguson, I want to give props to him for going out there and owning his moment. He basically was saying, hey, look, like, if this is my last time playing in the orange and black, like, what do I got to lose? And for a guy that probably could have gone anywhere else to get some playing time and stuck it out, like, I want to give kudos to him as well, too. He was great to talk to post-game.
Absolutely. And again, you can catch some of those videos, again, at beaversedge.com. Ryan catching up with Ferg, Mitch Canham. We had a whole lot of videos over 2 days, so definitely check in for that because, as you mentioned, Ryan, this is something that we haven't really seen. Actually, I can't even say I've seen since I've started covering the team. A idle week before, Selection Sunday. Like, typically, as you mentioned, this is conference tournament time. We'll see that before. But even before the Pac-12 had a conference tournament, this was just a weekend that sometimes was an extra series against, I remember there was a year like the last weekend was against Abilene Christian. So it's kind of odd to me, and I've never seen this, where Oregon State will have been done playing and now is idle this week. But I'll say this, Ryan, it could be good as far as like being fully rested going into the regional, right? I mean, no matter what, we'll talk about the national seed here in a little bit. No matter what, they will be hosting games at Goss Stadium, at least in the regional round, without a doubt. So, having almost 2 weeks to not have to not leave Corvallis, kind of be in your rhythm, sleep in your own bed, that's got to be an advantage.
Oh, definitely an advantage. And I know Mitch was saying, too, like, hey, give these 2 days off to the guys, let them enjoy other things outside of baseball for a bit, let them, rest and heal up from the travel schedule that they've had this entire year. And then also, too, I think that extra sort of almost 2 weeks of prep that they have, I think will even be a much more of a benefit for them in scouting for whoever comes to Corvallis for a regional at least. I know usually with the conference tournament, you kind of have a little bit of a shorter turnaround when you're not idle. So that's going to be something that I think will be very interesting to see how that develops out in terms of prep against the other 30 teams that will come to Corvallis. It's just a matter of, I think, who will that be when we get to Selection Monday for that announcement.
Absolutely. And again, we're catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com here on the Rip City Drive, talking some Beaver baseball. I mean, I think you're totally right, Ryan, because that'll be something, and that's the one thing about the conference tournaments that I did not care for, is that you'll see, right, I believe, can't speak specifically for the Big Ten tournament. I haven't looked at the bracket, but like for SEC tournament, for example, starts on Tuesday. That's tomorrow. Like, that's kind of the thing that's interesting to me, Ryan, and I felt the same way when the Pac-12 tournament started on either Tuesday or Wednesday. You're having to use a completely different round of pitchers because you're not typically, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but you know what I mean? You're not typically going to say, hey, Friday guy, let's move you up to Wednesday. Hey, Saturday guy, let's move you up to Thursday. So it kind of throws any team that's like relying on their dominant weekend rotation into a bit of a tizzy, so to speak. And I'm very curious to see across the country if any of these teams that are on the bubble maybe are one and done in their conference tournament because they're having to throw a midweek guy earlier in the week, you know?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And also too, it always seems to be the case when the Beavers were playing in the Pac-12 conference tournament that it was kind of a like, hey, yeah, we're not really going to use our weekend guys. Right. We're going to throw out the rest of the bullpen and maybe kind of our midweek starter and let them go for however long. And it was kind of one of those where it's like, yeah, we want to save our top three guys for when it actually does matter and not stretch them out too long, because ultimately I think it was always the mindset of regional and then super regional, getting back to Omaha, the goal, never really the conference tournament, at least from my experience of covering the team. And I'm curious also to see too, like how other teams approach this as well with their pitching staffs over not only just in the SEC tournament, ACC, Big 12, and then also the Big 10 too, and kind of figuring out how the cards shake out in that aspect.
No, for sure. And again, we're catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com, talking some Oregon State baseball. You talked about the offense getting back into a groove, Ryan. That's great to hear. I want to get your thoughts on the bullpen. It still doesn't seem like quite Oregon State's like slam dunk strength. I think back to the other night where, when Oregon State shook up their pitching rotation and kind of moved Nelson Keljo back to the bullpen, I was like, okay, here's going to be the guy that's going to settle in as like their ace closer. He gives up a home run the other. Like they had a hard time getting out of the end of that second game against Long Beach State, Ryan. So I'm just kind of curious, is the bullpen beyond, because we know the starting of Segura, Klein Smith and Dax Whitney are as good as any rotation. But the bullpen, do you have Omaha confidence in this bullpen?
Depending on what combination of arms they go with, I would have to say that I know Tanner Douglas hasn't been the best, and then Joey Munt also too has not shown his best stuff either on the mound. So I know a couple of those performances that they've had kind of made things a little questionable at best. But also too, I think you want to try and play your best, pitchers as in terms of situationally, no matter what. And if that's being able to have Munt and Douglas go, say, like an inning or two when it's kind of like the game's definitely out of reach for an opponent, yeah, definitely, you could bring them in. But I think that they're not necessarily finding the right combination of guys. I think it's more of just I think they got to, fill up the zone and attack it as frequently as possible and just be throwing with confidence. Like, I think one of the biggest changes in performance from a pitching standpoint from early on in the season versus later on is Wilson Weber going out there and taking mound visits, which I know Mitch kind of quipped about a little bit, saying like, oh, Dor, like, I think it's time for a mound visit. And then Dorman was like, no. Webby's got this. And so after a certain point, that's where you kind of have seen guys where maybe they falter a little bit, kind of in an outing or at least within a frame, and Webby goes to talk out to them, and then, okay, they get right back into rhythm and they're able to get out of the inning, which, like, credit James DeCramer in the midweek matchup against Portland, where in a bases loaded situation that could have gone a lot worse than what it ended up being. And that was really a big part of that as well, too. So I think that they have the guys I definitely would say so. It's just, I think, situationally working through the best combination on any given day.
Right.
If that explanation makes a little more sense.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think there's a distinction that has to be made, Ryan. Like, you and I know, we're around this fan base. We know Oregon State baseball fans have unbelievably high standards. And I understand why. You have 3 championships since 2006. You have the credit, you have the pull, all of it. And I get where, it seems sometimes like Oregon State expectations are really high and they want to make Omaha every year. How realistic that is. It's baseball, right? It's baseball. And, more than anything, I think we've all heard maybe some of the chirping about, the pitching, just how the pitching's being overseen this year. And I would kind of take a step back and just be like, well, at the end of the day, Oregon State's with their schedule. And that's the thing that needs to be thrown out there, Ryan. Oregon State's had great years. We know this. I don't know if there's been an Oregon State team that's had as good a year as this one's had, considering how few home games they had.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also, too, people kind of underestimated the impacts of, having a predominantly road-based schedule, too, as well. And so there might be those days where, the pitching doesn't look its best, or a guy might not have his best outing at any given time, but they're still finding ways to win, right? Like, that's what matters in the end. You mentioned the expectations. It's like, all right, getting to Omaha, right, and then being able to host a super and also a regional is important. But as long as you take care of business, right, the resume that you build out from this year should speak for itself, and you should be able to be in contention for that no matter what. Because it's like, as Al Davis has said, it's like, just win, baby. That's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
That's the mindset that this team, I think, has adopted, and really just going forward and controlling what they can control. Because at the end of the day, it's like, what are we doing if we're just worried about one series or a game or anything like that, where it's like the Beavers drop? It's like, it's baseball. It's going to happen.
Right.
What matters is winning the games you're supposed to be winning, and then going from there and letting the cards fall as they do, and stacking that deck in favor of your goals as a team each and every season.
Right. Again, catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com, talking some Oregon State baseball. Appreciate your time, Ryan. Great to catch up and talk some baseball. Before we get into D1 baseball's latest projection, which is mighty intriguing, and I've been teasing it for since we started the show. I definitely want to talk about that shortly. But let's look at the resume first, Ryan. Beavers come in right now as the number 6 RPI team per Warren Nolan, which is pretty reliable when it comes to breaking down exactly how the committee is going to look at this. And Oregon State's resume is pretty darn good. You got 14-0 against quad 4 teams, so 0 bad losses. You're 7-1 against quad 3 teams. I'm not sure exactly who that quad 3 loss is. I'd have to go back in the schedule and look, but one loss that's maybe not the greatest. Quad 2, you 10-2-1. You got that silly little tie with Iowa in there. And then quad 1, Ryan, here was the interesting part, is before, I believe, Hawaii and UC Irvine, a couple others jumped up, Oregon State had more quad 2 wins. Now they have a few more quad 1 wins. They sit 10-9 in quad 1 wins. So just one game over 500. But I was kind of looking at, a lot of the, content that's coming from Kendall Rogers, D1 Baseball. I love the work that those guys do over there. And those guys are not the committee, but they put together a pretty close look at. And Ryan, those guys, I listened to their Nerdcast a little bit, and they were the 4-game loss to Oregon is a really tough stain for Oregon State to wash out this year.
Oh, no, definitely. And I think, too, if you asked me at the start of the season, would the Beavers get swept by the Ducks? I would have said no. That's definitely something there, too. And I think that was arguably the lowest, if not one of the lowest points this entire season for the Beavers. And especially, too, pitching, I think, partly did them in a couple of those games. And then also picking off guys,
right,
running the bases as well, because that was something also too where the Ducks took a lot of advantage of stolen bases in that series. So that's something there where I do think that that loss definitely stings for sure. The Beavers used it in the right way for motivation to close out the rest of the season, but that's something where I think that may play a role in where the Beavers do get seeded.
I agree.
And that's more of a matter of how much the committee weighs that loss. And I think that's something where, like, I know Kendall Rogers and the crew, have talked about that, but it's more of, I think we can sit here and speculate exactly how much that'll impact seeding-wise. But, like, in the grand scheme of things, though, if you take that out, you should still be able to have the Beavers in the top 8 seed at least. But that's more of, you take that out, right? Like, how do you weight everything going forward there? But
right.
At the end of the day, right, like, it's more of you can only control what you can control, and sometimes that's just baseball.
Right. No, and I think it's worth noting because, like a month ago, Oregon was just kind of on the periphery, and it's relevant to this conversation. We'll tell you guys why here momentarily. But Oregon now sits with a top 12 RPI. They're 41-13 too, Ryan. They've been one of the hottest teams in baseball. And here's the thing that I think is going to be really beneficial to them come Selection Sunday. They are 9-1 against Quad 1 teams and 3-0 against Quad 2 teams. That's a combined 12-1 against some of the best competition. Oregon State's some 4 wins in there too. And I think that's where it goes back to what you and I had said, not too long ago. Even if they could have split that series, right? It was a 4-game series if you count the midweek game. Even if it had gone 2-2, I think Oregon State would be locked in this conversation instead of, still being curious. Even if they could have gone 1. But losing 4, and, that's not, with where Oregon is, it's not that bad of a loss. But you look at that, there's 2 weekends that I think the committee is going to zone in on, Ryan. That week against Oregon, and then the 2-game loss to Nebraska early in the season. I think it was their first or second series of the year. And, they kind of went on a tear after that too, and I think proceeded to win quite a few games. But, those are things that I'm curious of. And Oregon, as much as it, pains me to say as an Oregon State Beaver baseball fan, you got to give Oregon credit. They have played great baseball this year. Can they do it in the postseason? We'll see. But they're playing good baseball, and that's going to lead us into our next thought here, Ryan. And I got to get your objective thoughts on this. So last night, D1 came out with their most recent Field of 64 projection. Oregon as the number 8 national seed, Oregon State as the number 9 seed, paired up together. In theory, a super regional would be at PK Park. What are your thoughts on that?
That would be arguably, I think, one of, if not the biggest matchups between both schools, probably of all time, where it's like, all right, you got 3 games, right, to decide who goes to Omaha.
Yep.
So it's like the stakes couldn't be higher. And also, too, I think for Mitch Cannon's career, and I know probably Mitch wouldn't admit it, but I think they'd be looking forward to a matchup like that.
Oh, yeah.
If they were to take care of business in a Corvallis Regional, especially, too, it being swept. But, like, that would be something that would be very, very interesting if that outcome does play out. And I think in terms of, being able to not only – like a quality opponent, but also too, I think if you're any Oregon State fan, you look at that and you're like, well, what happened the last time we played at PK Park?
Right?
Like,
it's one of those things.
So it's a little nerve-wracking too.
Oh, for sure. It's one of those things. When I saw this, I was like, okay, Ryan, I've said forever, and we'll wrap up on this thought, but just. The hardest thing to do, if you can't get a top 8 national seed, I think one of the hardest things to do for a team like Oregon State is have to go down to the deep south and play in the temperature, the humidity that you are not used to. We saw it a couple years ago when they went down to Baton Rouge. It was kind of some crazy humid weather this last year in Kentucky as well. Like, it's just not easy. I mean, Ryan, you're from the East Coast. You know this. If you're playing baseball on the West Coast, you're not prepared necessarily to go down and face that sticky, muggy stuff you got going on in the Deep South. This way, if the super regionals shake out like this, Ryan, and even though they would have to go on the road, if they wouldn't have to leave the state to play in the super regionals, ooh, man, and not to mention, like you said, if this turns out to be this way, I think it'd be Oregon that would maybe be a little bit more nervous having swept the series, Ryan. I think Oregon State, if it were to match up this way, I think it would, call me crazy, favor the Beavers, because I think it'd be really hard to beat a team 7 times.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, like, a sweep in general is hard to do enough as it is, especially in baseball. But it's like, okay, now you got a postseason where that's a brand new season, it's a brand new ball game. And that's something that, you can't really plan for or go into with the expectation of, oh, yeah, this is going to be the same outcome again. But also, too, if you're – and also, too, not only the weather that you bring up, as well as the travel schedule, too, because you're going 45 minutes down the road. You're not going that far. You're not flying and crossing multiple different time zones, even though these Beavers have been battle-tested with that and with their schedule. But in addition to the weather, I know from experience, this time of year, and then as you start to get into May, June, the humidity is not good.
Yeah, it's sticky down there, man. It's hot.
Yeah.
It's hot.
Yeah, and that's something where even in the wintertime, too, it also plays a factor. But, most definitely in the summer, it's you can't go out there for 5 minutes without being drenched in sweat.
Oh, yeah.
Basically,
and just
as you get further into the summer.
Oh, totally. And just last thought on this, right? It's you just look I think that if Oregon State's not going to be a national seed, that pairing with Oregon being the 8 would be absolutely perfect, because you look at the other national seeds they could be matched up with. LSU, we just talked about it. Baton Rouge, end of May, hot, stormy, whatever. Auburn, same kind of thing. Georgia, same kind of thing. North Carolina, maybe a little less, but still kind of same kind of thing. Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and then Texas. So if you had to go on the road for a regional, I think Oregon would be the move. A lot still has to be decided this week. We'll see what Oregon does in the conference tournament and all that. But, it's going to be very intriguing, Ryan. It really will be.
Oh, no, definitely will be. And also, too, like I was saying earlier, I think for the Beavers at least take care of business this week and then kind of have to let everything across the college baseball landscape settle and figure out if they stay within that top 8 conversation. I think that'll be something that will be very intriguing to look forward to the next few weeks. And I know at least for Mitch Canham's crew, it's more of a hey, yeah, we're going to control what we can control and go from there. It's we do know at one point or another that we are going to host a regional at least. It's now just a matter of going beyond that. I think now for this group, and I think with the days off, not only being able to rest the arms a bit, as well as getting guys away from playing baseball for a couple of days or so, I think it'll be really beneficial to refocus, reset, be all right, new season. Here's our next, goal to go 1-0 to get to our end season goal, and that's getting back to Omaha.
Oregon State has not been to Omaha, folks, since they won in 2018. Ryan Harlan and I can remember a couple years back when they pushed Auburn right to the edge, but Auburn ended up taking their glory and won their Super Regional at Goss Stadium. So the Beavers looking to get back to Omaha for the first time since 2018. Will be eagerly tuned into Selection Monday on Memorial Day. Big thanks to Ryan Harlan. Ryan, thanks for joining me a ton on this edition of the Rip City Drive. Hope we can catch up again sometime soon.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on, Brendan. Thank you.
He's Ryan Harlan, BeaversEdge.com. You can check out his work at BeaversEdge.com. You can also follow him at Twitter, on Twitter at Ryan Harlan. Great guy. Absolutely love talking ball with Ryan. And, baseball postseason, man, it's exciting. I'm ready to go. And, man, I wish it was already next Monday already so we knew what was ahead of us. Nevertheless, we got more radio ahead of us. We'll take a quick break. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here with you on this semi-sunny, Monday afternoon. And today was a bit of a weird weather day. I'm curious if anybody else thought the same thing. Got up this morning and it was like, reasonably chilly like it would be. And then went outside about lunchtime, go get some lunch and do a couple errands and was like, I was in sweats. I was like, this is kind of warm. Okay, kind of muggy. Then the sun came out, and when I was driving into work, it was like, pushing 70. Then, now I'm looking outside, and it's like, it looks a little windy, the clouds. I mean, come on, folks. It's May 19th. I know that we seem to get our delayed summers here in Oregon, but come on. Can we just start to get the 70, 80 degrees? Like I think I told you guys last week, I spent a couple days down in Vegas, and it was at least 80 every day. I'm not saying we need to get hot, but like, give me them 80 degrees, man. I mean, it is time. It is May 20th. The April showers have long gone. It should be the May flowers. So let's start to see some nicer weather here because we know we can control that here, right? In the great Pacific Northwest. So you know what they say. If you don't like it, it'll change quickly. Appreciate everyone tuning in here on the Rip City Drive. Just want to finish up some NBA talk, finish up that Knicks and Celtics we were talking about before we caught up with Ryan Harlan. Lots of great stuff there from Ryan. Again, love talking Beaver baseball. And let me tell you, folks, we'll talk about it a little bit more on the show. But, man, if we could get a Oregon State Super Regional at PK Park, that would be one of the bigger things to kind of hit this state between those two teams in some time. So I would be so excited for that. I hope that's how it ends up breaking down in the brackets because that would be awesome. But again, closing out our thoughts on the Celtics and Knicks. We'll also talk a little on the other side too. We'll talk a little bit of everything NBA. We got Keith Smith coming up at 4:20. But just to kind of close the door on the Celtics and Knicks, we talked about that a little bit. The Celtics obviously falling in Game 6, Knicks winning the series 4-2 to go play the Pacers. But there was something that Jaylen Brown said after the game that I wanted to kind of follow up back on. Again, Jaylen Brown talks about what losing to the Knicks feels like.
Things didn't go our way this year, and it's unfortunate, but, we hold our head up regardless. Losing to the Knicks, feels like death. But I was always taught that there's life after death, so we'll get ready for whatever's next in the journey. I'll be ready for.
I mean, again, I love the competitive nature of Jaylen Brown. He's a West Coast college alum down at Cal, and I've definitely enjoyed watching his career. And he's another one of those guys who's heavily featured in the Celtic City doc that's on HBO. Highly would recommend that to anybody. It's a really great sports doc, but that kind of seems a little dark there. We're talking about like death and resurrection. I mean, I guess you motivate yourself, however, but yeah, that's a little dark for me, man. I mean, I think when you kind of, realize what we realize now is Jaylen Brown was playing through an injury, Jason Tatum tore. I mean, I just think injuries kind of caught up to the Celtics this year. I think that explains it. But, man, Jaylen Brown, he might take a book out of Aaron Rodgers' book at this point. Maybe go take a darkness retreat. I mean, when you're talking like that, resurrection, all those things, maybe he's going to go to a darkness retreat. But nevertheless, the Knicks get the series win over the Celtics. We'll talk a little bit more NBA. We'll recap the Thunder Nuggets to get you ready on the Western side of things. And so much more here on the Rip City Drive. We got Keith Smith coming up in the 4 o'clock hour. Also got Dave Coleman talking some PGA and Scotty coming up in the 5 o'clock hour. And then don't wait, folks. Don't worry. We've got Trailblazers Courtside coming up at 6 o'clock. We're going to catch up with the Godfather, Dwight James, talk some Blazers. We're also going to run down the Forbes billionaire list. Do we have a billionaire ready to buy the Blazers yet? We'll run through some fun names. You got the Rip City Drive here on a Monday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Scotty Scheffler is your PGA champion at Quail Hollow after winning by a whopping 5 strokes. Just another day at the office for the best golfer in the world. Eagles coach Nick Sirianni has cashed in on his Super Bowl win as the Eagles signed him to a multi-year contract extension. And 49ers linebacker Fred Warner is the highest paid linebacker in the NFL for the second time in his career, this time signing a 3-year, $63 million extension for Warner. The NBA Conference Finals are set and will get underway tomorrow with the Thunder and Timberwolves scoring off in OKC. Indiana, New York will start the Eastern Finals on Wednesday. Coming up, we'll be catching up with Keith Smith from Spotrac, talking some NBA with Keith. Hour 3, we're going to catch up with Dave Coleman, talk some PGA. What's his comparison to Scotty Scheffler? You'll hear hour 3. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Monday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here with you on this Monday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a good start to their week. We're talking some sports here on the Rip City Drive. Pleased to be talking with you guys. Anyone who wants to join the conversation, 503-248-0620. Again, that phone number, 503-248-0620. Had an awesome first hour. Talked a little NBA playoffs. Talked some Beaver baseball with Ryan Harlan. Man, again, I just have to say it again. If we could get Oregon and Oregon State, a super regional matchup with a path to Omaha on the line down at PK Park, I'd be all over that matchup. I really hope the committee ends up giving us what we could want there, and that would be something awesome for Oregon and Oregon State baseball fans here in the area. But also got to finish up our NBA talk from hour number 1. Again, we talked exclusively about the Celtics and Knicks, and the Knicks getting over the hump and ultimately reaching the conference finals. But on the other side, we had a 7th game between the Denver Nuggets and the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this was kind of like the Game 6 with the Knicks and Celtics, a wide victory for the Oklahoma City Thunder. They take it 125-93. Again, I really thought going into this game that the Thunder did have the advantage, again, having 18 more wins in the regular season, a deeper team, a more established coaching staff at the time, considering David Adelman for the Nuggets was a, quote, interim at the time. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. But at the same token, Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, deservedly so, will win the MVP this year. I think he's an incredible talent as well. But pound for pound, my money, you want me to, draft and start a team with a player, I'm starting with the Joker, man, because he is that good. He wasn't quite good enough to carry, the Nuggets in this game, but nevertheless, they go down. And I still think, considering that they let Michael Malone go in the regular season, the fact that David Adelman was able to push the Nuggets all the way to a Game 7 of the West semifinals tells me that he might get a chance to keep that job. I think that's pretty impressive. It seems to me like just what I've been able to see and hear on social media and whatnot, the players seem to be really supporting him. And maybe they kind of like his style compared to the rigidness of Michael Malone. So, a lot to dive into there. Let's start on the Nugget side of things and hear from Nikola Jokic as he talks about how he thinks, just his thoughts on whether or not David Adelman will be back next season.
I'm not the guy to add. I mean, it's above my pay grade.
I have to chuckle at that because we all know, respectfully, that's a load of baloney. Like, that's the franchise player. If the franchise player went to ownership and is like, hey, I really like what I'm seeing with this guy. I'm going to be with, Denver for the significant future. Like, give me this guy. So I do think that's a little modest from Jokic, and I actually kind of like to see that. But nevertheless, David Adelman, obviously the connection to Rick here in Portland, I'm pulling for him. I hope he gets that head coaching job. Great to continue to see, the Adelman family succeed in the NBA. But speaking of David Adelman, I want to hear from him post-game as well. He talked about how this was just a crushing loss for the Nuggets.
When you lose, it's crushing. And it's the last time you'll be in the room with those guys. And it's beyond that, you only get one of these. This is the one moment we had together to make this run. and they're all individual to themselves, and they're also special. Anybody that's played sports understands that. So walking out of that locker room is it's crushing, and it's going to take a while to get over that.
I think that says a lot for a quote interim coach to kind of, be in the moment and be like, he knows he's coaching for his future job, whether that be Denver or somewhere else. And I think, that has a lot of realism with David Adelman there. And I think that's what I really like. It's authentic. It's real. And, despite a very tough loss, that's kind of sounds like a guy that I would run through a wall for. And I think, we were all kind of shocked at the timing of why they let Michael Malone go when they did. But, a lot of us speculated they kind of wanted to see what David Adelman could give them. And, I'm not going to lie. Just knowing how a coaching change has the potential to upend a franchise from time to time, I think they have to seriously consider giving David a shot because, again, you pushed OKC to 7 games. If the Nuggets could kind of clean up their cap situation a little bit, kind of get a little bit more depth next year, I think that would be very advantageous for them because they have a window. They have, either the or top 3, depending on your argument, best players in the world right now. You have to capitalize on Nikola Jokic's window. So there is that. But on the other side of the coin, as we mentioned, Thunder to get the win. And, you got to give the winners their props, right? So obviously they were the 1 seed, the only 1 seed to make the NBA Finals. Here's what Mark Daigneault had to say about what the difference was in winning this Game 7 against the Nuggets.
Yeah, I thought our pressure today was a difference maker in the game, and we accessed that at different times in the series, but today we did it, most consistently for the 48 minutes, and we didn't even play a perfect game on offense, but, it was just such a catalyst for us, the pressure, the deflections, the turnovers, and, even when they got shots, I thought the pressure and the help really disrupted the rhythm of those shots, and the guys just did a great job of, sifting through all the noise of a Game 7 and just focusing on what we need to do to win, and we really executed it.
That was Mark Daigneault after the Thunder 125-93 win over the Denver Nuggets. And again, I think he's one of those coaches that, is kind of growing as he goes as well. And, this is now, the furthest the Thunder have, obviously made it in his tenure. And, I like what I've seen from him too. We always kind of joke the baby Thunder, the young Thunder, and, now they're not really that anymore. They repivoted. Obviously got a star, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and that helps. But you talk about, the other pieces as well. Chet Holmgren. I love Jalen Williams. There are just some really, really good players on that team. And Chet Holmgren was one of those players who talked about his journey to get to the Western Conference Finals.
It's been a long road here. Been through a couple things, but at the end of the day, it's all worth it for moments like this. We're not done yet. We have a long way to go, but you got to definitely enjoy all the little steps in the journey.
And it is, right? You talk about, I go back to, I believe it was David Adelman's like, nothing's guaranteed. And you have to, you have to take advantage of the opportunities when they are there. And, credit to, Chet Holmgren. He's like, they played a good season. They've made it this far. And at this point, pound for pound, for my money's worth, they are the favorite. Right? I'm curious to get Keith Smith's thoughts on that coming up here in just a little bit, but they are the favorite in my mind. And being the top seed, almost 70 wins in the regular season, they've played pretty good basketball throughout. They got tested by the Nuggets a little bit. I'm curious to see, how much the Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards can cause the Thunder problems. That matchup intrigues me, and at the same token, so does the Knicks and Pacers for albeit different reasons. But, the Thunder still are the best team in the West, and they have to prove that they can be, or someone else has to prove they can be beaten, right? So, don't get me wrong, in the West, the seeds don't matter quite as much because you've got, teams and games that are separated by very little. But again, you're talking the 1 seed in Thunder playing the 6 seed Timberwolves, right? Who saw that coming? Or in the East, the 3 seed Knicks playing the 4 seed Pacers. Again, we're going to be catching up with Keith Smith. I want to know, is there any chance you saw this as the Final Four? And, of these Final Four, the only one that I probably would have felt really confident projecting that far would have been the Thunder. But, I go back, I think injuries had a part of this, right? Right? Do the Timberwolves advance if Steph Curry's healthy, right? You start on that side, right? If the Cavs, don't get hurt early on, have those injuries that kind of put them behind the 8 ball in the series against the Pacers. What if Jason Tatum doesn't get injured? I mean, lots of what ifs, and that's why the NBA is the NBA, because the teams are you have to rise up and overcome injuries and do all that. But when you lose your best player or a really good, in the case of the Warriors and the Celtics, the Celtics, I think, were better off trying to have a chance to win without Jaylen Brown. As much as the Warriors can be, were kind of a fun story to root for. Jimmy Butler and a couple other of those role playing type guys. When Steph Curry went out, there was no chance. When Anthony Edwards is playing as good as he is, and that's the thing where I still think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is probably the best player in the series, if not left. But number two, that's a question. Like, you might think Jalen Brunson, maybe someone off the Knicks. Anthony Edwards, he is him, man. And I truly believe he's just got a different gear. He really seems to have, that kind of killer mindset. I mean, he reminds me probably the most of someone like Kobe Bryant. And, I think if the Timberwolves come out and play, they've got talent, they've got defense. And I think that, if they come out and cause Shai Gilgeous some problems, kind of like they were able to cause Steph a few problems when he was healthy earlier in that series, kind of really make him work, that could be a series that, maybe the Thunder give them a run for their money. I mean, that's intriguing to me. Pacers Knicks on the other side. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about it with Keith here coming up in just a few minutes. I love the story of the Pacers. I think the story of the Knicks is awesome. Like the fact that the Knicks haven't, won their championship since, what was it, 72, something like that. That's about as long as it gets back. That's even predates Portland 77 here, folks. So that's pretty far back. And I think in general, the NBA can be a little bit better when, one of the biggest markets is really, really good. And to be perfectly honest, I'm just so happy we're not anywhere close to having, the gold of the Los Angeles Lakers anywhere near relevance. So, I mean, if you want to get my bias out, it's just really nice to not see any Lakers. It's been really nice to not hear about LeBron, hasn't it? I mean, it's just, it's like music, sweet music to hear all these new players and new teams. And, even though I would have liked to seen the Warriors, take their series, there's something to say about, the finals without Steph, without Draymond. It has some intrigue to it. And specifically with the Pacers, there was all that talk going into the series against Cleveland about how Tyrese Halliburton was overrated and the Pacers, just kind of lucked into getting there. And the Pacers took care of business against the Cavaliers. I love what Rick Carlisle's been able to do. And, as much as all four of these teams are awesome stories, I think the Pacers might be the coolest story if they were to somehow win. And I only say that because, Rick Carlisle kind of, pushed off a little bit, when his, when Dallas made their change and moved on and everything. He just kind of casually went up to Indiana, built his team. The move for Tyrese Halliburton started to look genius. I mean, as time goes on, it's like, oh, maybe they didn't really need Sabonis. That Tyrese Halliburton's guy is pretty good, along with the rest of their role players, and guys like Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner. So I'm very curious to see how that series shakes out as well. We're going to take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be talking to Keith Smith from Spotrac. We'll be getting his thoughts, obviously, on the conference semifinals, if anything kind of surprised him there. And then I have to ask, like, in any world, did you see these four teams being the final four teams left in the NBA? You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcome back to the program. Welcoming our next guest into the show, please give a warm welcome to NBA writer for Spoke Track, Keith Smith. Keith, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it, Keith. No, thanks for taking the time. Obviously, no, you're super busy this time of year, but let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Let's start with the Set in Stone Conference Finals. Did anyone expect this cropping of the Final Four?
I don't think so. It's funny. You get any unexpected result, and somebody comes up with, this is exactly what I picked. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. But, for the vast majority of us, nobody picked it to be, a 3 versus a 4 in the East, especially when you had the dominant Cavaliers and Celtics in the regular season. The Thunder, I think a lot of people had getting in there. But then the Timberwolves, major upset for them. Not a lot of people even had them getting out of the first round. So this is pretty huge all around.
Yeah, no, I said we can definitely start on the West, and I'm definitely intrigued by that because, Keith, before I brought you on, one of the things I was saying that's kind of I love this playoff. These playoffs have been really fun to watch, but nevertheless, I take a step back and I go, this is where you got to realize injuries suck. It's like you think of Jason Tatum, right? You think of the injuries the Cavs had early on against the, Pacer series, kind of put them behind the 8 ball. And then the biggest one, did the Timberwolves get by the Warriors if Steph Curry's fully healthy?
Yeah, and that's, unfortunately, that's a big part of the postseason in the NBA is, you go back last year, a lot of people talked about, well, the Celtics got lucky because they had injuries. The year before when it was Denver, it was, well, they didn't costing because Jason Tatum hurt in game 6 when they were in the midst of trying to pull off an incredible comeback. And it's just, no titles get asterisks next to them, right? Everybody earns them, and a big part of it is you have to be really good to win a title, and you got to be pretty lucky with the injuries too.
No, it's absolutely true. Although, Keith, I must say, even still, you're in the NBA circles. There's no way that bubble championships looked like a real championship. There's an asterisk next to that one, right? Come on.
No, I don't think so. Everybody was in the same boat.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's like the
played it out.
Oh, totally. 99% agree with him. That's like the one where I'm like, circumstances for sure. But no, catching up with Keith Smith over here from Spoke Track. Let's just start with the series. Start on the West. You mentioned, the Timberwolves maybe not being projected to get out of the first round. They take out, take out the Lakers, take out the Warriors, and now play the Thunder. The Thunder got tested more than I thought they would against the Nuggets. If Anthony Edwards, goes off, could you see the Timberwolves giving the Thunder a series, or do you like the Thunder pretty confidently in this matchup?
Yeah, I like the Thunder pretty confidently, but sure, yeah. I mean, the Timberwolves play really good defense. Julius Randle has been incredible these playoffs. Had a really strong regular season, but really has gone to a different level in the playoffs, which is great because that's not always been the case with him. They've got guys that defend. They've got guys that rebound. And then, like you said, they have Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards is going to walk into any game feeling like he's the best player on the floor, and he may be correct in that. But he's going to come in and he's going to try to do his thing. And because you have him and you have that defense and you've got enough guys that can make timely shots, they're going to be in this. They're going to push the Thunder. It's not going to be easy for Oklahoma City to get through this series. I do think the Thunder will win because I think they've got more things that they can go to, especially on the offensive end of the floor and styles of play that they can get to. But I do think the Wolves are going to be in this if they get a real challenge.
Catching up with Keith Smith from Spoke Track. Appreciate your time, Keith. And I was just talking about it earlier in the show as well. How rare is it to have a trade like the Timberwolves and Knicks had that was so beneficial to both? Is that a rare win-win trade when we talk about, Randall and DiVincenzo being over in Minnesota now and Towns being with the Knicks?
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those, I think the one that really comes to mind as a win-win when you get down to it that was somewhat like this was the Pacers trading the draft rights to Kawhi Leonard for George Hill. When they did that back in the day, George Hill joined that Pacers team, helped lift them into multiple conference finals appearances. They just ran into the big three Miami Heat that were going to be really difficult to win. And obviously Kawhi went on to lift the Spurs to a title and, have the career he's had. But it is very, very rare, especially with established players they're going to have that big of a win-win trade. But Karl-Anthony Towns gave the Knicks everything they needed at the center spot. And then on the flip side, Julius Randle's played well, and Dante DiVincenzo gave the Wolves a bench guy that they didn't have a year ago. So it really has been a great trade.
Yeah, one of those rare win-wins. And another one, switching gears to the Pacers, Keith, I think at one point, it was pretty widely like, okay, the Kings and the Pacers, when they flipped, Sabonis for Halliburton, it was like, okay, maybe a win-win too. The more and more this goes on, and the fact that the Kings only kind of had that one little moment in the playoffs so far, and now, De'Aaron Fox being out of town, like, is it safe to, and Tyrese Halliburton just continuing to be him, is it safe to say now it looks really good for the Pacers and Rick Carlisle, they made that trade?
Yeah, I think so. And again, that was one where both teams kind of traded from a position of strength. You had the Pacers had Miles Turner already in place, and they really needed a lead guard that could run. And Domantas Sabonis was a little bit of a kind of a duplication for them, because they knew for them to get to where they wanted to be, he was going to have to play the 4 or play the 5 and not the 4. And then on the other side, for the Kings, Tyrese Halliburton, if he continued on with De'Aaron Fox, does he ever become what he's become? Because he's going to be in less of an on-ball role, and it's going to be a little bit different. So they traded there, and they really needed a big man at the time that they got Sabonis. So, I think it's still one where both sides are pretty happy. But, yeah, if Halliburton keeps going to these levels and ultimately lifts the Pacers into the NBA Finals, it's going to be hard to say that they didn't win that trade.
Absolutely. And just a little bit more on the Pacers. Like, I feel like they're not getting enough love, Keith. Like, I kind of think, like, Rick Carlisle, this team, like, what they did, like, I think they kind of deserve some credit. I think they're going up against a very tough and very deep Knicks team. But, I think the Pacers have kind of been, maybe arguably out of these 4 teams, one of the cooler stories.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think part of what's happened is they zipped right through the Bucks in the first round because of all of Milwaukee's injuries and how well they played. And then in the second round, they were pushed, but not to the same level that the Knicks were by the Celtics, because they won a couple of those Cavs games by major blowouts. So I think people just kind of forgot about them, I think, a little bit, where it's like, oh, yeah, I guess they're pretty good too. And that can happen sometimes when you're out there handling your business fairly quickly. So yeah, but I think, they're a really good team. They're a deep team. They're another team that can play a lot of different styles. If they want to go, really small, they've got the guys who can do that. If they want to play fast, they can do that. And then I think what's been the key for them is that they can now score in the half court when they're not racing the ball up and down the floor. And their defense has improved. They've become the kind of team that has success in the postseason compared to last year. They were much more of a regular season type team. Even though they made it to the East Finals, it was seen as, well, can they get it done when things slow down? Are they going to be able to get enough stops? This year, they've proven that they can play that way.
Yeah, and not to mention, you throw in like the casual championship experience Rick Carlisle has. I think back to, grabbing Pascal Siakam it was a couple trade deadlines ago, and those, it's not like this team is like, new to the postseason, and that's why I said I think I like the Knicks in the series too, but I think it'll be interesting to see how that ultimately shakes out. If you were to say, kind of going towards the NBA Finals, Keith, who are you kind of? So you said you like the Thunder. Who do you like in that Pacers-Knicks series?
Yeah, Pacers-Knicks is an absolute true 50-50 coin flip for me. So I'm going with the Knicks in 7 only because they have home court in Game 7. So I'll go with the Knicks, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Pacers won. I think it's probably more likely that the Pacers would win in 6 at home than they would go on the road and win in New York. But maybe they will. We'll see. What it looks like. Certainly the Pacers have had no shortage of times they've gone in there and ripped Knicks fans' heart out in the course of NBA history. So we may be in line for that. And then in the other one I've got Oklahoma City. I think they're going to win. I think it might be 7 again, because I think the way the Wolves defend and the fact that Oklahoma City hasn't always played their best basketball at times in these playoffs, where they've just kind of disappeared in a few games. And I think if they do that against the Wolves are going to get those wins. They're good enough to kind of take those games and then run away with them a little bit.
Definitely. And just another thought on that, Keith, I was just kind of curious, like, I think it's been kind of known, like we've seen the numbers come out that the NBA playoffs have been better this year as far as viewership numbers than we've seen. And now that we get to the conference finals, how much do you think like the fact that there's some parity, like it's not like there's a Celtics or a Warriors or even a Nuggets, like all four of these teams, I'm just kind of doing the math in my head quickly on the fly, Keith, but long time since their last championships.
Yeah, I mean, only the Knicks have an NBA title.
Okay.
Not the other three have not won an NBA championship.
Sorry, I was considering Thunder still with the Supersonics claiming their championship,
right? Yeah, that's the one, but they don't claim that title.
Okay.
Oklahoma City, they don't have a banner up for it. They don't make any references to it. They basically consider their history starting when they started as the Thunder. So, and the NBA has made it kind of clear if, or better put, when Seattle gets a team again,
sure,
all the Sonics history will revert back to them, much like it did with the Hornets back in the day. But I think, that's part of it. You don't have a ton of, experience with these guys. And to your point on the ratings, we're going to find out, right? Is it one, it's how the Knicks are in there, right? The biggest TV market in the country. That's certainly going to help things quite a bit. But, are people interested? Are people interested in, Thunder, Wolves when they should be, because you've got two really good teams and you've got two, superstars in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who may win MVP later this week, and you've got Anthony Edwards, who should be one of the faces of the NBA. So that's I think what the league is banking on, and their TV partners is we've got at least star level players coming in here to show up for these playoffs.
Absolutely. Talking with Keith Smith from Spotrac. Keith, just going to switch gears a little bit now that we talked the playoffs. I want to talk a little bit about the lottery. Just got to get your take. Me personally, I was poolside in Las Vegas watching in my phone as the Mavericks jumped in the lottery, thinking the Portland Trailblazers might jump up, but it was the Dallas Mavericks that did it. The people that were around me, I think it was very shocking publicly. I was kind of at like a outside kind of bar area. It was like, whoa. I mean, did you kind of have that same reaction too?
Yeah, we were live on our show, NBA Front Office show, doing a live like watch along with the lottery. And we basically lost our minds as soon as Dallas didn't come up at the 11th pick.
Right.
Because that, when you do this, all right, that means they jumped. And that was like, holy cow, they're in the top four. And then when 4 came up and then 3, and it was like, it's either Dallas or San Antonio. Like, it was just absolute bonkers. Complete, madness that this is how this played out.
Oh, I mean, it was like, just watching social media that night, Keith, was almost a treat, because if I had $1 for every person, it's conspiracy, I'd be a rich man today, Keith.
Yeah, I hear you. And you know what I always tell people is, it's a little sad to me that this is where we are. Everything has to be a conspiracy.
Sure.
Sometimes things just happen. And I get no one's going to believe it, but the NBA every year at the end of the lottery, after it's been revealed on TV, then they show you the actual drawing, and the actual drawing is not. It's not a made for TV event. One, they do the first pick first, and then go down to the 4th pick, and then everybody slots in. So there's no fun reveal to it. The other part is it's done. I think people think it's there's a million ping pong balls in this thing bouncing around with team logos, and that's not how it works. It's number combinations. They pull out numbers, and then you got to kind of, all right, who's got this number combination, and that's how they determine who gets the pick. And the other thing is, for it to be rigged, you'd need 30 teams in on it. You would need roughly 14, 15 media members in on it, because they're in the room watching. And you need to get a company that, does everything they do as a security firm in Ernst & Young to be in on it. And that's where it all starts to fall apart a little bit. I think just, when you're talking, relatively small amounts of, things, there's sometimes things just happen.
Oh, totally. And that was my reaction too, because, Keith, like every other, fan of a fan base, who hasn't gone on NBA Tankathon and spammed the sim lottery button until your team comes up at the top, right? So it's like, I would tell fans that it's like, hey, they in their own way spun the lottery, and hey, it just so happened to come up Dallas. I mean, it is pretty out there when you think like, oh wow, they did trade Luka. Now they have I think that's more than anything. It's just kind of like life smiling a little bit. But nevertheless, Keith, the Blazers fall back to number 11 in the lottery. Do you think they'll keep that pick? Do you think they'll look to trade it? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting, off season for the Blazers because there's a couple different ways this could go. I also now with the team officially up for sale, I think that potentially throws maybe a little bit of a monkey wrench in things. But they've got a whole lot of veteran guys and guys who maybe in the past their contracts like DeAndre Ayton, maybe not the most desirable contract in that, but now it's flipping around to being an expiring deal. So maybe, he's somebody who, a team that, finds themselves needing a center, could look at getting. Anthony Simons is a player who any number of contenders I think would love to have because either he fits in as a pretty good starter or a tremendous weapon off the bench for them. There's also a world where I think Portland says, you know what, we're not quite ready or let me rephrase, we're more ready than what people think, and they want to make some moves to not go all in, but let's push forward in this. And I think part of what could motivate a desire around let's try to get better is look at the West. I mean, not only do you got to beat out the 10 teams that made it into the play-in tournament and beyond, but you also now have Dallas was in there that mix, but you have San Antonio, coming up strong. They've got a team. If New Orleans could ever get healthy, it looks like they could be okay. So all of a sudden you're sitting there saying, man, if we don't actually make moves, we might find ourselves, 4 or 5 years from now, like we never kind of got there because the teams behind us jumped us, and we still have all these other teams we need to catch. So I'm very, very curious to see what approach the Blazers take this summer.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of moving pieces, and I think you articulated that extremely well, Keith. And the other piece of it, as you mentioned, is, I believe, a day or days after the lottery, it's announced the Blazers are going to be, put up for sale, and that's obviously going to have its own impact. But the thing I kind of wanted to ask you, Keith, and it's definitely, I'm just curious, like, do you think any of the prospective bidders that maybe came up like second or third for like the Hornets, the Mavericks, or the Celtics could pivot and be like, oh, look, another team's on the market in the Portland Trail Blazers? Or do you think they'll be very selective and maybe pull someone out of like left field that we have no idea see coming?
Well, I mean, I hope they're extremely selective, right? I hope it is, let's find somebody who's going to do right by the fans in Portland and do everything that they need to get the Blazers back to a place where they're, regular in the playoffs and those sorts of things, and eventually, pursue a championship. That's what we all hope, right? Is you don't want them to kind of go with, well, this person paid the most money because they looked at it as, sometimes these teams, I always say there's only 30 of them, right? And maybe there'll be 32 here soon, but there's only 30 of them. So right now that's a pretty exclusive club, and sometimes people just want to be a part of the club and say, yeah, I own a basketball team. And what you really want is somebody there. Now, as far as second choices, it's certainly possible, right? Maybe you could have somebody who is very interested in one of those other teams. I think a little bit of the challenge with the Celtics, it sounds like most of the folks who were involved there were, from the Boston area.
Makes sense.
They were, looking at that. And I'm just not sure, it was as much, I just want to own a basketball team as it was, I want to own the Celtics.
Of course. And
or, with the Hornets group, a couple of those guys that had been involved in other things. So I think for them it was a little bit more, hey, we want to get there. But yeah, I want nothing but the best for, Portland and their fans. So I hope to get somebody who, understands the area and understands how much that team, means to the city. And really for what now, almost 2 decades, the entire Northwest, because there hasn't been another team in that area, that hopefully they understand, what that all means.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's, obviously some of the first, thoughts coming out, Keith, was, will the Blazers, will this new owner possibly, look to move things around? And we talked about it earlier in the week, Adam Silver had a front row seat for what it was like seeing the Sonics leave and, that PR mess that kind of happened as a result. So, I'm not too concerned about that from the Blazers' perspective. I think more than anything, like you said, just getting someone who wants to, build the Blazers up to where they are, because if you can bring back like Seattle in a couple of years, you get that I-5 rivalry going again. That was some great basketball back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's what we want to see, right? Let's get the Sonics back, and let's get those teams battling each other again. And that was a really great rivalry there. And it was funny because as a kid who grew up in the Boston area, it was like I'll openly admit I found myself a little drawn to the Sonics because they were also wearing green. Not a lot of teams wear green, so I was a little drawn there. But those were my late night watches, right? Where the Sonics and the Trailblazers. When my parents thought I was in bed and I was sneaking one more game in, it was often them. So yeah, I'm with you. And I to go to the relocation stuff, I don't think there's any chance because I think the NBA knows they're going to expand and it's going to come. I will say sooner rather than later in terms of it's not going to be another decade before we see new teams or anything like that. It's going to be, I imagine we'll see new teams on the floor playing probably within 5 years or so.
So maybe by this new decade.
But let's get to the cities, Seattle, Las Vegas. Those are the two that are prominent. But I think they're going to, cast a wide net. And if it is, hey, we have really great interest from Vancouver again, which has been mentioned, or Montreal, or we feel like it's time for Mexico City, I don't think we're going to sit at 32 for very long. I think there's a chance this turns into, hey, we went to 34 teams to try to get a couple markets ahead of, some of these other things. Like even in Seattle and Las Vegas now you're fourth, right? You're fourth to the market because they have teams and the other stuff. And they both have, other things that go on in the city as well. And there's only so much money to go around. People can have season tickets to everything. And that's, something that they have to factor in, and they're not going to want to miss out. So I don't think there's any risk of a relocation, happening with the Blazers sale. I think if anything, there was even a whiff of that whoever that was, they'd be out of the running to be the new owner very, very quickly.
No, and I think that's something that will bring a smile to Blazer fans' faces for sure, Keith. And again, Keith Smith from Spotrac. Keith, really appreciate your time, man. It was great catching up, and look forward to doing it again soon, my man.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
He was Keith Smith from Spotrac. That was an awesome conversation with Keith. I mean, again, for those, we had to wait for the end to kind of ask the stuff that I know y'all at home really want to listen. But hearing Keith, who is as plugged in as anybody with NBA stuff, kind of say not much to worry with relocation type stuff. Same thing echoing from what we heard from Sean Highkin earlier this week. I mean, that's what you want to hear as a Blazer fan. I don't even want to discuss it. It is a non-issue. Until it's an issue, let's not even pretend it's real. And I love being able to see that. And Keith obviously talking about the conference finals and, what the Blazers might do. Will they maybe attach that pick to a veteran, look to move on? Lots of great stuff from Keith. Appreciate his time. We got the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more Oregon State baseball here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here with you on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great start to your Monday, or rather, great finish to your Monday here this Monday afternoon. Just got done talking with Keith Smith. Lots of great stuff there from Keith. And I think the most important thing for Blazer fans is that, he put the odds of a new owner coming in looking to potentially move the team as near zero. And when we're hearing that now from multiple sources. We touched on Hyken last week. He's like, I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's like 99.99. And that's pretty much what I was hearing from Keith too. And is like, if an owner or someone in the mix wanted to do that, I liked what I heard from Keith where he's like, the NBA will come down and shut that down. That is music to my ears, and it should be music to all y'all's ears too. Again, nothing I was ever really concerned about to begin with, but again, the amount of chatter of people just, well, is this something to worry about? Well, is this something to worry about? You ask guys like Keith Smith because they know, and, Keith, I think very, on point, was saying that, Adam Silver's not going to let a Sonic situation, happen again, for the PR that was. And I think that's definitely good news for Trailblazer fans. So caught up with Keith Smith, talked some NBA. Again, the conference finals all set in stone, getting underway tomorrow. First hour, we caught up with Ryan Harlan, talked some Oregon State baseball. And again, Oregon State baseball, regular season has wrapped up. They're going to be waiting for the selection show next Monday. Oregon, meanwhile, has their conference tournament this week, along with the majority of other college baseball teams. But I'll just say this. If Oregon State and Oregon could meet up in the super regionals for baseball, as it's currently slated, again, the most recent projections that came out had Oregon checking in as the number 8 national seed, Oregon State checking in as the number 9 seed, which would have them paired together for the second round of action. And my goodness, if you could have Oregon State and Oregon baseball at PK Park with the chance to Omaha, a shot at Omaha at stake, I mean, that'd be pretty special for them Pacific Northwest baseball fans. So I'm definitely going to be rooting for that. And again, Oregon State's going to be idle this week, so nothing more the Beavers can do after sweeping Long Beach State. They're now just going to hang around and see what's next as we get ready for Memorial Day and the selection show that Monday. Meanwhile, like we said, Oregon and many other teams have a conference tournament this week. And, conference baseball tournaments, as we talked about with Ryan, are a bit unique, a bit weird in the sense that they start Tuesday, Wednesday during the week. You're not wanting to typically throw out your starting weekend rotation guys because, you don't want them to move up 3-4 days, as compared to Wednesday versus Friday or Saturday, so on and so forth. So conference tournaments usually get a little wacky, and you sometimes see teams who are really high seeded be one and done, and they drop a little bit. You see teams that are one and done and don't, their body of work says more. So I think it's going to be very interesting to kind of see how that ultimately shakes out. But I think Oregon State has done everything they can, right? We talked about it. Oregon did get the series win when the two teams played, and I think that's where Oregon will have the advantage, being getting the home field and being the national seed compared to Oregon State most likely being one of the top not national seeds. And then, you duke it out, right? I mean, after the games we saw earlier this year, I mean, if you're an Oregon State fan, I think you'd like the opportunity to rematch. And if you're on Oregon's side, maybe you don't want to see Oregon State again, considering, that you handled that series pretty casually in the regular season. So lots to get into there. And coming up here a little bit later in the show, we're going to be catching up with Dave Coleman from the PGA, and very excited to talk to Dave because Scotty Scheffler just doing Scotty Scheffler things this last weekend. I mean, what an impressive, weekend for him, and talk about a year, right? I mean, Scotty Scheffler in the last year, I mean, you talk about his rest, or faulty arrest, whatever you want to call it, and then a year later to come back and win the PGA. I think that's, pretty impressive, and it continues to show why he, pound for pound, the best golfer alive. And I think, sometimes it's just really easy for him. Sometimes it's not the most flashy, but he just gets it done. So very curious to talk with Dave. Next hour, we'll be talking with Dave Coleman, talking some PGA. Want to hear his thoughts on Rory and the driver issue that Rory had too. So lots to dive into. Rip City Drive. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday coming up. Final hour. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Scotty Scheffler is your PGA champion at Quail Hollow after winning by a whopping 5 strokes. Just another day at the office for the best golfer in the world. Eagles coach Nick Sirianni has cashed in on his Super Bowl win as the Eagles have signed him to a multi-year contract extension. 49ers linebacker Fred Warner is the highest paid linebacker in the NFL for the second time in his career, signing a 3-year, $63 million extension. And the NBA finals are set and will get underway NBA conference finals are set. Will get underway tomorrow with the Thunder and Timberwolves squaring off in OKC, Indiana, and New York. We'll start the Eastern finals on Wednesday. Coming up on the big show, we're going to catch up with Dave Coleman, PGA Pro, get his thoughts on Scotty Scheffler's dominance. Want to get his thoughts on Rory's weird driver situation. A couple other golf-related things. Big shout-out to Ryan Harlan and Keith Smith for joining us earlier in the program. Also got Trailblazers Courtside coming up later as well. You got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive, just past the 5 o'clock hour here on a Monday. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. And if you're on your way home, making your way home. If you're on your way to work, hopefully we're getting you ready for a good evening. Appreciate everyone tuning into the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing today. Just got done talking with Keith Smith last hour. Some great stuff. Most importantly, for any Blazer fans that are tuned in, Keith put the odds of a new owner looking to come in and move the Blazers at a almost 0% chance. So always great to hear that as we've continued to hear more about this sale process and also hear the news about NBA expansion, talk about the NBA playoffs. A lot of great stuff with Keith Smith last hour. And then got to give a shout out to Ryan Harlan in the first hour, talking some Oregon State baseball. Oregon State baseball has a chance right now as the projections currently stand to be lined up, paired up with Oregon in the postseason, have a potential postseason matchup between the two teams with a shot at Omaha on the line. I think that would be about as cool as it gets. So that'd be really, really cool to see. Definitely going to be hoping for something like that as well. But resetting you the stage, like I said, we'll catch up with Dave Coleman from the PGA here in just about 18 minutes. Get Dave's thoughts on, like I said, lots of different things. I mean, he has an apt comparison for Scotty Scheffler. He compared Scotty Scheffler to an NBA franchise. So I want you guys to think about that who are going to be tuned in for Scotty here or for Dave here in a few minutes. He said, blank, Scotty Scheffler is this franchise. So I'm very curious to hear his explanation for who that is. We'll also reveal that when we talk to Dave. Some great stuff there. And then, again, after winning the Masters, seeing Rory finish in the 40s, definitely not what I expected. So I kind of want to get his thoughts, diving into a little bit more. It sounds like he had a driver issue, but so does Scotty Scheffler at one point. It didn't really seem to bother Scotty. So I'm very curious to kind of see what went down with Rory's driver and if that had anything to do with it or if he just had a bad couple days, which obviously can happen to any golfer anytime. So lots to get into with Dave coming up as well. But I want to circle back to the NBA, and then we'll get into a couple other things here on the Rip City Drive, kicking off the 5 o'clock hour. As we mentioned, the Thunder and Timberwolves are going to duke it out in the West, and the Pacers and Knicks in the East. Again, I really like how this is shaken out. And again, I appreciate the clarity from Keith as well, as he mentioned that the Thunder, that was one thing I was always curious. The Thunder do not recognize the Sonics' history and expect that to go back to Seattle when they get a new team. That was one thing I didn't necessarily know how all that got handled, and that was kind of a really, kind of eye-opening moment for me because, like right now, if you go, and it's just a video game, but if you go play like NBA 2K, for example, right, and you're playing like with the all-time Thunder team, which is like the all-time best Thunder players, on a roster, you're seeing Sean Kemp. You're seeing Gary Payton Sr. You're seeing, Detlef Schrempf, so on and so forth, the great Sonics players intermingled with the great Thunder players. So, hearing that from Keith, I mean, Seattle will get a team back. I hope and pray that they are the Supersonics because like Keith said, I love my Trailblazers like nobody else, but I must say the Sonics had a cool color combination, cool logo, cool everything. And I think it'd be really, really unique to bring back that I-5 rivalry. And how about Keith, man, throwing out, is it possible we could, I mean, I would not put it very likely, but I just think it's cool that he threw out, could Vancouver be interested in a team again? And that's got to feel like deja vu to everyone around here who is older than your boy, who can remember, the Sonics and the Sonics and the Grizzlies up there. And, I do remember the Sonics, pretty vaguely, but I definitely remember that growing up into the mid 2000s. Grizzlies, not so much. Can't say I ever remember the Vancouver Grizzlies being there, but if the NBA expands, and like he said, it's probably not going to stop at 32. So if you could get, let's just say it's Vegas and Seattle first, which I think very first and foremost, that's going to be right there. So that gets him to 32. Keith also threw out, he threw out Mexico City. He threw out Vancouver, BC. He threw out Montreal, BC. I've heard interesting things about Nashville as a potential place. I know that's obviously pretty close to Memphis, but, I've heard Nashville as an intriguing place. I think if you were going to add another, I think, again, just kind of throwing it out there for fun. If you were going to add another team to Texas, I think Austin could definitely support one. That would be kind of interesting, especially as the Spurs right now already play some games throughout the regular season at the Moody Center in Austin, just to kind of expand to their fan base that's there as well. I think that'd be, mighty intriguing. And then, from there on, I mean, not like there's a whole bunch of cities that are starved for NBA teams. I think it's a little, I think it's pretty well balanced. But at the same token, how cool would it be? Let's just be selfish for a minute. If the Blazers didn't have to be one of the most traveled teams in the NBA. I mean, you add, let's just say, for example, they shake up the West, and considering that the Sonics and whatever the team in Vegas would be in the West, almost most likely, that means a couple teams probably have to get bounced to the East. So I'm just curious, is that Memphis? Is that, Minnesota? Is that New Orleans, right? I mean, I think Memphis and New Orleans are probably the most likely, considering they are legit east of the Mississippi River. But, that's another thing. And all of a sudden, if you switch things around like that, and the Blazers are suddenly traveling to Vegas or Seattle more for games, I mean, let's just assume they played each of those teams 3 times. That's 6 trips you're not taking very far distances. And, it could be a kind of an arbitrary thought, but I've always thought that the Blazers seem to travel quite a lot of distances, and it's because there's not necessarily a team in their backyard. The closest they can get is the Kings or the Warriors, obviously down in kind of the North California, North Bay, or, and you think about the past when they just could go up I-5 both ways. So, yeah, I would definitely be very excited to see, the future of the NBA expansion. I think that was something else that Keith mentioned that kind of, perked up my ears a little bit. And I'm like, really? Like Seattle and Vegas, we know lock, stop, that's going to happen. I think that's going to be awesome. But if the NBA is going to really continue, where do we go from there? Do we go to Mexico City? Do we go to Montreal? Do we look back at Vancouver? And I can't remember who I was talking about it with. It wasn't Keith, but someone else in the NBA spectrum, who I was just kind of talking about how when they had the Grizzlies, I don't think Vancouver was ready for the Grizzlies, if that makes sense. And when Keith said Vancouver now, it makes you almost wonder, and I've heard that too, that Vancouver could be interested in having, another team. And I think, with the NBA already having a footprint in Canada and Toronto, already having been in Vancouver before, and then like he said, looking into Mexico City, I think it's all very realistic possibilities. And I would love to continue to see, which states may potentially, say they go to 35, right, one day. Who else could be in that mix to get a team? So lots of exciting stuff there as well. And then switching gears a little bit, just to kind of close up before we get ready for Dave Coleman here in just about 10 minutes. We'll be talking some PGA with him. Definitely want to throw out a couple things on my mind. As you guys know, I definitely love to catch up on all the latest, TV, music. I consider myself to be quite a buff in those two categories when I'm not taken up by sports, so to speak. And a couple things this weekend I wanted to mention. For those who are maybe more the country fans, definitely got to say after Friday, I had not listened to all of it, but now as I come in here on a Monday, anyone who is a country fan and hasn't listened to the new Morgan Wallen album would definitely recommend doing that. quite long, quite intense. I think something like 36, 37 songs. But by the time I got through that, some absolute summer bangers coming off Morgan's Country album this summer. So very excited to see, ultimately how popular that album gets in the coming days. And then I also stumbled onto a new TV show that I think would be interesting to kind of take a note of. So Max, it's on Max, called Duster, and it is a crime thriller series created by the brain of J.J. Abrams. So for those who don't know, J.J. Abrams is responsible for making Star Wars, Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker. He's also wrote films like Armageddon, Star Trek, created Alias, created Lost, also directed, Mission Impossible, one of the Mission Impossibles, a couple other films. Long story short, J.J. Abrams, one of my favorite, directors, showrunners out there, and was a longtime ABC guy. I mean, I'll say this: growing up, I don't know if there was a bigger Lost fan than me. That was my show. I would challenge anybody with my Lost trivia, and think that was just one of those outstanding shows. And that's where the connection is here, because the star of Duster is none other than Josh Holloway, who was on Lost as James Sawyer Ford, and then has been in some other different things. Particularly for those who heard me last week, Josh Holloway also had a season appearance in Yellowstone, which I absolutely loved him in. But you guys should know, after I mentioned last week with Yellowstone, I'm a big fan of period pieces. Really big fan of these directors and showrunners who can, make these pieces that are set in specific time periods look and feel so real. And I mentioned the awesomeness of Taylor Sheridan with 1883 and 1923. Duster with J.J. Abrams, Josh Holloway and company, same kind of thing. So it's set in 1972, right? So you've got, and it's, basically a crime thriller. Definitely don't want to give anything away, but it's only been one episode. But a very intriguing storyline after one episode. If you're into kind of like the racing of like, almost has like a Dukes of Hazzard kind of vibe to it, but also, some kind of more organized crime in it too. And I would just say, from watching the first episode, definitely hooked me. I'm excited to see where the show goes. But again, a period piece. The cars from the 70s, so accurate. The Duster itself, so accurate. You love the clothes, right? The big collars. I mean, it's fascinating to me when you can see just how these directors can put you in a world that truly makes you feel like you're living 50 years ago. And, I jump into this and I'm like, wow, this really does look like 1972, from, the tape decks down to the clothes, down to, just the conversation. Like there's a scene with an FBI agent when she's getting the rundown of her new office, and is like, they're like, oh yeah, and we do this on Friday nights, and she's like, far out. And I'm like, man, I mean, that is so like 60s and 70s, right? I mean, who says far out anymore as far as something being like cool? So, I really like kind of those little period pieces that are really, you can tell are done quite well. They're usually quite expensive to make because it's not easy to put yourself in a time machine, but something that has definitely caught my eye so far. So would definitely consider, or tell everyone to consider, if you have Max, to check out Duster. One episode so far, but created by J.J. Abrams, starring Josh Holloway. All right, well, we will go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Dave Coleman from the PGA. I want to get Dave's thoughts on Scotty being Scotty and being the best golfer in the world. I want to talk about Rory's driver. We'll talk about a couple other things as well. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you here. Hope you all are having a great Monday so far. Pleased to bring on our next guest, Dave Coleman, PGA Pro. Dave, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Hey, Brendan, I appreciate having me on tonight, man. Excited to talk about Scotty's big win there at Quail Hollow.
Oh, man, it was certainly something. I want to, before we get into it, because there's a lot to get into, Dave, I definitely want to just go a little behind radio. I was texting you gearing up for this radio hit, and I appreciate it, for one, because I've always been on the other side producing for Chad Doing when you've come on with Chad, and I'm like, oh, golf, I got to talk to Dave. So I appreciate you taking some time, Dave, and most importantly, you gave me an awesome comparison I've been teasing all show long. Tell me which NBA franchise you think Scotty Scheffler is.
He's the San Antonio Spurs, man. I mean, he's just so consistent. I mean, it's, there's been a lot of people saying that, over the last few years because he's not the most flashy guy. He's not the most exuberant guy. He doesn't play the game like Rory does. He doesn't play the game like Tiger did. But, he's just so darn consistent. And that's the thing with the Spurs back in the day. I mean, the Spurs were so consistent. They always had these really solid teams with the fundamentals came first. And I think that's the thing with Scotty is, we don't see him hitting wild, crazy shots out of the trees, doing things that are insane. But, I mean, it seems like when he gets a little bit off, man, he fixes it right away, just like he did yesterday on the back nine after he kind of struggled a little bit on the front. So, there's no doubt. I mean, Scotty Scheffler definitely has that same mindset of like, hey, the Spurs took it, one game at a time. That's how I think pretty much Scotty takes it, one hole at a time. And a lot of these guys, I think, they say they do that, but I don't know if they really do because I think they're always thinking about the big picture as well. I think you listen to Scotty and you listen to his press conferences and you listen to, the way he talks about his life in general. I think the reality is this is how he lives his life. So, it's a pretty special thing to see because, we're living in an era where a lot of that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, you're totally right, Dave. And again, chatting with PGA Dave here on the Rip City Drive. I mean, it's almost like I think everything Scotty, are we sure like Scotty Scheffler couldn't be like the guy who diffuses like a bomb? You know what I mean? Like he seems like he just is cool as a cucumber all the time kind of a thing, Dave. And like you said, maybe not the flashiest guy, but like you cannot argue he's the best golfer in the world right now.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, and Rory, obviously he's had a great season, but you look at what Scotty's done. I mean, it only he could diffuse that whole thing that happened last year around Christmas time where, he cut his hand. I mean, most guys would have taken a long time to come back from that. It would have been a real slow process. I mean, basically he got it fixed in a few weeks and, I mean, he came back and he was playing really well right away, and people were expecting him to win, and he was playing really good, but he wasn't winning. And it's like, well, geez, give the guy a chance. He's coming off of something that's a pretty serious injury, and he's made it look like it didn't even happen. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible to think how this guy, kind of makes, he does these crazy things, look ordinary. So, it's so much fun to watch because in an era where it is all about people, with money and, fame, and none of that even matters to him, it seems like. It's like he's just going out to play golf, and I think that's great for the sport.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Again, chatting with PGA Dave here on the Rip City Drive. I mean, you mentioned the injury too, Dave, but I'm curious, just talk about Scotty's 370 days. To go from where he was a little over a year ago, the arrest and everything that, I mean, I still can't even believe, even just talking about it now, I remember talking about it here on our show and everything else, it still seems like batty crazy you can't believe. And to be where he is now and then the injury on top of it, talk about the year he's had, man.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, he's had an unbelievable year. I mean, it's, a guy who's won so many tournaments, in the last calendar year, but then these crazy things happen. I mean, the arrest thing was a huge misunderstanding. I blame a lot of that on the logistics, too, with the PGA of America. In Louisville and Valhalla, it was probably a little too small where I think if you look at the build-out, the whole area there at Quail Hollow, it was huge.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt that played a lot into it. And it was it was one way in, one way out, where I think you need a much bigger area around your golf course, to run a major championship these days. So I think that played a lot of what happened to Scotty last year. But I think the whole thing with the hand thing is like, it's kind of like that's who he is. So like he just like, yeah, I'm gonna go like, cook dinner or do whatever he was gonna do, and like instead of having a chef like a lot of pro athletes would have.
Right.
It's crazy to believe, but yeah, he's just. I mean, I think the other thing too, what we've seen him do, like he came from behind in the Olympics to win the gold medal there, and then he's won tournaments so many different ways. I think that's a unique thing, and I think at the end of the day, the key with him is like to beat him, I think you've really got to be able to get into his head by really doing things that he can't do, and that's a guy like Rory, who obviously can hit the ball a little bit further, and then I think you got to almost feel like, hey, you got to, if you're going to beat him, you got to say, I'm going to wedge it better than you, I'm going to putt it better than you, I'm going to drive it past you, I'm going to do everything better than you, and to do that, you're going to have to probably play your A to A+ game every day, because that's what he pretty much brings. And even when he plays his B or his B- game, like we saw at Augusta, he's still a factor in the tournament. So
yeah.
It's a really cool, unique thing to watch, because you don't see that all the time, where a lot of these guys, they're a little bit off. It hurts them a lot. So, he's still in the hunt and when he doesn't play his best. So that's a surreal thing for the tour.
Absolutely. And again, like we talked about, Scotty obviously getting the win and doing it by 5 strokes. I mean, impressive. Just another day at the office for Scotty. But going into the PGA, Dave, obviously we didn't get a chance to talk beforehand. Did you like him going into this, or did you expect someone else to take it home after this?
Well, I think obviously Scotty would have been on my list if I had to rank guys. He probably would have been number 2 or 3, but I think Rory was the guy that I thought was going to play great there, because Rory has had so much success on that golf course when they play a regular PGA Tour event there. And, he's won when it was called the Wachovia and the Wells Fargo. I mean, he's just had so much success on that golf course. And if you look at the course, it's very long. It really favors a long hitter. And even in the years Rory was struggling, Rory came in there, with a lot of confidence and played well. So I really thought this was Rory's time to really say, hey, you know what? I'm going to, I wanted Augusta. I'm going to go into Quail Hollow again, where I've got a lot of confidence and a lot of past success, and I'm going to go out there and just do what I've always done there. And I think the driver issue, where the USGA tested his driver, and then obviously the PGA ultimately determined that he couldn't play with that. That was probably his undoing in that event, because it's hard to find a backup driver that works as good as your one that you use in the tournament. So that was a different thing than we saw it happen to Scotty as well. So
right.
That's something that's so unique to golf.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Dave. Just curious, because I did see the Rory driver thing came out first. I was like, okay, maybe that had something to do with him finishing in the 40s. Maybe just threw him out of rhythm, whatever. But then I also saw that Scotty had it. Was it a similar issue between those two, and Scotty had a better backup club, for lack of better terms, or was it not people reading too much into it?
So a couple things. I think number one, I think the drivers, these guys hit so many balls week in and week out with their drivers. So there's no doubt that the faces get worn down. And what happens is they obviously get tested. Why they don't test all the players, that's a good question. They only test certain players each week. I don't understand that. But I would say Rory probably hadn't hit his backup driver as much. Scotty doesn't have the club head speed that Rory has, so he can hit it a little straighter, where Rory has a lot more speed, and he can hit it a little further. But when you hit it that hard and with that much speed, if you're offline at all, your miss is going to go further offline. So I think that played into it a little bit. I think the other thing I heard that Scotty had tested this driver a few weeks ago before he won at the Byron Nelson in Dallas. Maybe he had done a little bit of testing. And then I think the other thing, too, that a lot of people aren't bringing up is Scotty did not play last week at the Truist event in Philly. And, Rory did. And a lot of these other guys did, too. And so Scotty had a full week to go to Quail Hollow, play whatever he wanted to play, hit all these different shots, hit different clubs, get intricate knowledge of the course from probably members there, guys that he played with, maybe people that worked there. So to me, that had to have been a big factor in this as well. So, it's an interesting thing, but it's something you only see in golf. So it's
right.
Super unique and interesting, though.
No, for sure. Just a couple more questions. Catching up with PGA Dave here on the Rip City Drive. Dave, appreciate your time talking some golf. John Rahm made a pretty good push, towards Scotty in the end. Did you, before ultimately kind of getting stuck, just your thoughts on John? Did you think he was going to put a charge into Scotty, or did you think Scotty was kind of in a pretty good lead at that point?
I thought Rahm had a good chance. Yeah, I mean, I think Rahm is a guy that has come from behind in tournaments before. I think he's comfortable in that chasing mode. I think where Rahm's undoing was 14 and 15, the two easiest holes on the course. He makes par, and then 16 he hit a bad tee shot, hits it right, and when he missed that putt on 16, that putt that broke across the hole. I think a lot of energy came out of him because I think at that point he knew I got to really force something. I got to really do something special here on this brutal par 3 coming up. And then 18 is a really, really difficult par 4 with bunkers down the right, a creek running all the way down the left side, and it cuts in front of the green. So that's a really, really tough finishing stretch there as we saw. And I think Rahm, was at a point then where it's like, geez, I got to really force it. I got to really try something creative. I got to go for broke. And, it's hard to do that on those holes at the end there because those holes are just so challenging and there's not much margin of error. And, I think Rahm gave it a great effort, but we'll see. We'll see where he goes from here. It's good to see him back playing well because a lot of the live guys struggled, but it's to win majors, man. You got to be good for 72 holes. You can't get away with much.
No, it takes such tremendous. Just the highest level of golf is so it takes such absoluteness and needing to be almost perfect, as you mentioned. Catching up with PGA Dave here on the Rip City Drive. Just a couple more things for you, Dave. Bryson DeChambeau finished third. Where does he rank amongst your top golfers right now? He's probably someone that. He's someone that I've identified with. I like to root for, and he's kind of a fun guy to root for. Finishing, tied for second in this one. How'd you like him in this matchup?
Yeah, I think the thing with Bryson going forward is I think he's always going to be a factor at the majors because of the way he drives the ball. I mean, he drives it so far and so straight. The big thing I want to see him do is get better with his irons, and it's interesting because I wonder about playing that single length iron where all his clubs are like the same length as I think it's a 7 iron. And, that's an interesting theory, but I wonder if that's got to be tough for him to play, shots with like a pitching wedge and a 9 iron and a sand wedge because that, obviously the club is longer and those wedges and those short irons are not made to be hit with a longer shaft like that. So is that hurting his distance control? That's going to be something that's going to be interesting to see if he can figure out because I feel like, he's played probably like his B game at the Masters and at the PGA, and he's had a good look at winning both tournaments. So I think it's something small that he's got to figure out to win another major. I think he's got a good look at Oakmont for sure, but the key with Oakmont is, the greens are so difficult there. And the other thing that's going to be tough is if he doesn't have those wedges dialed in, there's so much slope on those greens, Brendan, there at Oakmont. It's going to be interesting to see how he controls his distance there at Oakmont and going forward because that's the only thing holding him back from winning other majors. I mean, man, I really thought he had a great chance to be right there on Sunday with Scotty and with Rahm and, I thought he was going to really be in the mix, and we'll see what happens going forward. The irons are the thing he's got to figure out.
Yeah, I'm curious just your thoughts on Oakmont, Dave, versus, Pinehurst last year because, you look at Bryson's 2 wins, obviously different spots, but they both came, in the U.S. Open. Is there something about, like, that time of year that he happens to play some of, as you mentioned, like the B game, like, is he kind of someone who you could see as kind of being a sneaky challenger maybe to Scotty at this at Oak Hall you mentioned?
Oh, I think at Oakmont, I think there's no doubt he's going to be one of the favorites.
Okay.
I think there's no doubt he's definitely a guy that can win on that golf course. Length on that course is, obviously length anywhere is important, but he's driving at that straight. He's going to have a huge advantage. If you remember back in 2016, Dustin Johnson won there, and Dustin has always been a very long hitter. But the one thing that Dustin really did leading up to the majors, that year was he really dialed in his wedges. He got on TrackMan and he really locked in those distances where, he knew the difference between, say, an 80-yard shot, an 82-yard shot, a 90-yard shot. So that's something I'd like to see Bryson do if he's going to really keep winning majors and obviously doing more than just contending, because he can contend all he wants. But I think, to me, to get this legion of fans that he's gotten from YouTube and, the casual golf fan interested, he's got to win now. I mean, he's got to win, because it's one thing to contend, but fans are going to want more. We see this in every sport, and especially in golf. It's great to be in the mix, but, he's been in the mix a couple times now. He's got to put his foot down and prove that he can close on a Sunday. And I think Saturday night kind of did him in a little bit on the Green Mile as well. But it's going to be interesting at Oakmont, because there's no doubt the greens are really tough there. The fairway bunkers are really penal. And, the other thing, too, there that you really have to be careful of is, if you hit it in the fescue there, we saw years ago when Mickelson hit it in there, you can get injured. It's kind of like playing a little bit of a links course. So, Oakmont is going to bring out a totally different animal than what we saw at Quail Hollow, but man, it's a hell of a test. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, absolutely, and like to your point, I'm very excited to see if Bryson can potentially make those adjustments. Again, something about the U.S. Open seems to bring out some of the best play in him each year. Appreciate your time, Dave. Really appreciate chit chatting with all the golf stuff, man. And I look forward to catching up again next time, whether that be me hooking you up with Chad or me back on the mic, my friend. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, you got it, man. No doubt about it. Yeah, the U.S. Open's going to be fantastic, and I think it's going to be a fun lead up to it. We got some big tournaments in between, and it's a great time of year for golf. And I think Pittsburgh's going to do a great job hosting the U.S. Open. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to travel there for it, because this is Oakmont is a very traditional U.S. Open type setup, and can't wait to see what they have in store for it, because I think it's going to be probably somewhere around even par or 100 that wins, and that's what the U.S. Open loves, and it definitely favors guys who hit it long, who hit it straight, but guys who have a razor-sharp short game as well.
Absolutely, and again, definitely going to be amped for the U.S. Open June 12th through 15th at Oakmont Country Club, as Dave mentioned. Dave, appreciate your time, my friend. Look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you so much for all the golf analysis, my man.
Sounds good, man. You have a good night.
You too. Appreciate it. Dave Coleman, PGA Dave. Big shout out to Chad Doing for assisting and getting Dave on the show. It was great to catch up with Dave and talk some golf. And, for me, I was a pretty casual / not. I mean, golf wasn't really something that was super interesting to me until I got older. And then, when we were kind of all locked down during the COVID times, I'm like, man, I really like that Bryson guy. I kind of like watching golf on TV. And, ever since I've been pulling for Bryson and I definitely like to see him have success. And I think he's a little unique. And I think that's why he has his fan base polarizing, I'd maybe say. But man, if we get Bryson to get another U.S. Open crown, that would be quite something. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Final segment coming up before we get you ready for Trailblazers Courtside. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive, final segment of the day here on a Monday afternoon. But don't fret, folks. We got Trailblazers Courtside coming up at 6 o'clock. I'll be hosting tonight as we talk some Trailblazers. A lot to get into on Courtside. We're going to catch up with the Godfather, Dwight James. Want to get his thoughts on everything Blazers, both falling back in the lottery. Could they look to trade the pick? Could they look to keep the pick? His thoughts on the ownership change forthcoming. We're also going to get into some draft prospects. Should they try to, or should the Blazers decide to draft at 11? So we're going to run down some names there and kind of get into all the nitty-gritty of that. And, of course, we'll be pleased to have any of you join us. 503-248-0620 is the telephone number here on the Rip City Drive. But again, big shout out to our guests today. It was an awesome show. I mean, we caught up with Ryan Harlan in hour one, talked some Oregon State baseball, and talked about the awesome potential of Oregon State having a Civil War matchup in the postseason with a shot at Omaha on the line. I mean, could you ask for anything better as a Oregon State or Oregon baseball fan in this particular instance? I hope everything goes chalk. Like I've said before, I think that just based on the metrics and the head-to-head, Oregon has a slightly better case to be a national seed than Oregon State. However, Oregon State does have the strength of schedule, and in doing so, they have a higher RPI than Oregon does. RPI also makes a big-time difference in postseason seeding. But regardless of how that shakes out, I mean, let's just say it holds chalk with what it is, and it's 8 Oregon, 9 Oregon State. If both those teams take care of business in the regional, and then you have a super regional at PK Park between the two teams with a shot to Omaha on the line. I mean, that would be about as good as it gets. And then conversely, right, it's baseball. Postseason baseball is as wacky as things get, right? I mean, teams don't win their regionals all the time. So, say in this particular case, it was, say Oregon won the regional, Oregon State didn't, for example. Then Oregon would get whoever came out of Oregon State's regional, and that would be an advantage for them, or vice versa. Say Oregon State wins their regional, Oregon falls in their regional. Then Oregon State would host the super regionals at Goss Stadium with whatever team came out of Oregon's regional. So, again, the double elimination format of the regionals and the super regionals, it's just the best. And I must say, I know it's not NCAA March Madness. You don't have millions and millions and millions of people filling out brackets for baseball like you do for college basketball. But I will say this, hot take, college baseball postseason is some of the best, if not the best postseason. When you are able to have 4 teams all in a regional, double elimination, and just the wackiness that is baseball. And for those of you who are curious, like you've said that now twice, Brendan, why? Because baseball is truly that sport where the best team doesn't always win, right? I mean, think about it in this context, right? If you'd be pretty shocked if one of the top 5 college football teams at the end of the season, like top 5 teams, don't win the national championship. Like for this last year, if Ohio State didn't win or Notre Dame didn't win, and it was like, for instance, if it was Boise State that won the championship this year, let's just throw that out there, there would be like oh, wow, like what happened to, Georgia? What happened to these teams that were so elite? Baseball, it's a totally different animal in the sense of like, do you have a good Friday night pitcher? Can he shut down an opposing team who's been playing hot, right? Sometimes these teams that come in and even play regional games, right? It's like these smaller teams, I think of, teams like, Yale or Cal Poly or just, some example of teams who are going to be, 3-4 seeds in regionals. They may not have a dominant 3-day rotation. They may not beat you 3 times, but oftentimes in regional play, you have teams come in who have at least one really good pitcher where you're like, oh, this is their ace. They're going to throw him in game 1. And even if you're the top seed hosting a regional, you may play a 4 seed that can give you a run for your money. So I think that's the coolest thing, and you see it every year. Oregon State's seen the good, 3 national titles, all since 2006. Not like anybody's counting, but all since 2006. And the bad, right? See times where you get eliminated. Like I remember in 2014 when Oregon State was the top seed, the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, and lost to UC Irvine in their own regional. Didn't even make it out of the regional. Didn't even make it the supers. So, you truly never know and then how baseball shakes out. And I think that's one of the things that I like the most about it is just it's truly unpredictable. You think the best teams are going to win, but every year there's a team who goes into a regional and beats the top seed, beats them in their own house. And I think that's going to be very intriguing as we get closer to Selection Monday, next Monday, and we find out ultimately where Oregon and Oregon State land here in the postseason projections. But if it holds chalk, as I mentioned, and we get a super regional Oregon State and Oregon, that would be quite something. And I think you'd see just about every baseball fan in the state want to come out and go to those couple games. So that would be quite something, especially considering Oregon State already being a dominant national power. Oregon trying to rise up under Mark Wasikowski. And again, I mentioned a couple years back when they hired him that, it might not make Oregon State fans particularly happy, but Oregon made a really good hire, they made a really good hire. And, obviously you underperformed quite a bit with George Horton all those years after, Oregon brought back their program. And we all know why they brought back their program. Let's not try and split hairs here. Oregon brought back their baseball program because they could not stand seeing the team in orange and black just up the road win championships in 06 and 07. And, they brought back their team. That's just a factual thing. And now we flash forward all these years later. I would say, Oregon's had some decent runs and recently, had some good postseason runs, but still looking for that elusive trip to Omaha. They got close under George Horton and have had a couple, close runs with Waz too. And I think, Oregon State still has the swagger and the credibility of being a three-time champ, but, Oregon has resources and a lot of resources throughout their program too. So if I'm Oregon State, I'm also keeping a watchful eye on the neighbors down to the south because, it's kind of been Oregon State's thing. And, that's their titles and what they dominate in for the most part. And I think as we get closer and closer with the rivalry, that might be one of the rivalry matchups that's still pretty even, as we kind of continue to go through because Oregon State is an established national power. Oregon has got really good coaching and now is able to obviously throw a lot of money at their situation. So that obviously, helps as well. And I think as you look at it, the Big Ten, relatively a weak baseball conference. And I think, Oregon could be the class of that conference. I know that's not necessarily saying a lot, but you got to, we'll see what they do in the postseason, but you got to give them credit. Oregon went through and claimed to share the Big Ten title this year. And, UCLA is always one of the better programs on the West Coast, kind of like Oregon State. And, they finished tied with UCLA, which I think was, pretty impressive for them. I'm not wanting to sit here and sing all the Oregon praises, but as an Oregon State baseball fan, game got to respect game. And, Oregon, they took the Beavers to business in those 4 games. And I honestly think that's going to be ultimately why the Ducks get the national seed and Oregon State is matched up with them as the 9. That's just my pure speculation at this point. But nevertheless, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how all that shakes out. So nevertheless, that's going to go ahead and start to wrap it up for us here on a Monday for the Rip City Drive. But don't worry, we've got Trailblazers Courtside coming up. Here in just a few minutes, we're going to catch up with the Godfather, Dwight Jaynes. I haven't talked to Dwight in a minute, so I'm excited to catch up with him, hear what he has to say about, the Blazers falling back on the lottery, what his thoughts are on the upcoming ownership change and how that's going to all shake out. We're also going to look at mock drafts. We're going to take a look and see which players could be available for Portland at the 11 spot, should they decide to draft, and a lot more. So it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of dive into. We're also going to do what we did last week. We're going to run down the Forbes billionaire list. Again, anyone on that Forbes billionaire list they want to see by the Trailblazers, give us a call in the final segment of Trailblazers Courtside. We're going to talk about that as well. Big thanks to Ryan Harlan, Keith Smith, and Dave Coleman here on the big show today. I'll be back with you guys tomorrow, 3 o'clock for the Rip City Drive. Well, hello there. Welcoming you to Trailblazers Courtside. No, not Chris Burkhart tonight. Brendan Slaughter continuing to fill in for the station. Just got done with the Rip City Drive and pleased to host Trailblazers Courtside with y'all tonight. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We'll get into some potential draft prospects here coming up. And with the Blazers having the number 11 pick, we'll take a look and throw out some names, see if anybody is interested, and just kind of, go through and look at the numbers and, see who maybe catches our eye early on. And then in about 20 minutes, we're going to catch up with the Godfather, Dwight James. We're going to bring him on courtside, talk about the reaction to the Blazers falling back to 11 in the lottery, whether or not they should maybe trade that pick, hang on to that pick, what moves could be made, this offseason with that pick as kind of ammunition. And then, obviously, the post-lottery news, talking about the Blazers being put up for sale and what his reaction is to that. And obviously, the big news that, a lot of people instantly were like, oh, Phil Knight. And then that was, shut down very quickly. So I'm curious to see kind of where they pivot from here, kind of so to speak. So a lot to get into. And then in the final segment of Courtside tonight, we'll take a look. I mean, just for fun, we'll run down the Forbes real-time billionaires list and throw out some names. And again, I'm very excited just to kind of throw out some names and see, potentially who could stick, because again, there's going to be people we haven't heard of and coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, as Keith Smith said back in hour 2 of the Rip City Drive, that it's an exclusive club, and it is. I mean, for those listening, if money were no object, who wouldn't want to own a professional sports franchise, right? Who hasn't, myself included, ran a MyGM or a ownership type deal in NBA 2K and been like, oh yeah, I can run the team pretty good, right? I can do the trade finder, I can do the draft analysis and all those kind of things. I can work my way through the salary cap and the second apron and all those kind of fun things. And I think that going back to what Keith said in the second hour, he said a couple things on Portland that I think were just very worth noting. And for one, he said the odds that the NBA allows the Blazers' new owner to even sniff the idea of moving the team, hogwash. And I think that's about as good of an answer as you could probably get. I mean, we talked to Sean Highkin, our Rip City Radio Rose Garden Report correspondent, and he said it's not 100% as far as never, no way going to happen. But he's like, it's probably 99%. So, I mean, I know I've seen a lot of Blazer fans just naturally concerned in the last week with the news that the team was going to be put up for sale, that, hey, could this be a situation where, a new owner just looks at things from an objective lens. And, hearing from Keith, who, again, Keith is as connected as anybody is working with Spotrac and his front office show and all the things Keith does, is just extremely connected to the inner workings of the NBA. And I go back to what Keith said, I go back to what Sean said, and both of them said pretty bluntly that the NBA is just not going to let that happen again, especially when they're angling to expand. And, further illustration with that point, like Sean said, the Sonics going to Oklahoma City the way that they did was a PR nightmare for the NBA, and something that Adam Silver had a front row seat for. And then also working in Portland's favor in this regard, it's like exactly what Sean said. There was a time when someone wanted to buy the Kings, move them out of Sacramento, and move them to Seattle, right? And that solves a problem, right? There was a problem with the NBA not being in Seattle. And the NBA is like, no, we're not going to take this team away from Sacramento. And they found the legit investors to make it happen in Sacramento. And I think that's something like he said. I think that's something that you have to hang your hat on, because it's not really anything to be concerned about. And I think Portland's gonna be here for a long time. I think the city loves their Trailblazers. I think the Trailblazers love the city of Portland. I couldn't really imagine anything different. And I think now we all just kind of buckle up and sit along for the ride, right? I mean, there's going to be a vetting process to see which billionaires catch the eye of Jody Allen and whatnot in the NBA. And I can't pretend to know exactly how the what do you call it? The due diligence works and the qualifications. It makes you wonder, just to compare, what I know, that, for example, if you are someone who wants to, open a McDonald's franchise, for example, right? Say you're a business person, you've got some wealth, you want to open a McDonald's franchise. I don't know the exact figures now, but there was a certain amount of time where it's like McDonald's wouldn't even consider you for a franchise if you didn't have X number of dollars liquid in the bank. So again, going back to what we said earlier, this team is probably going to fetch between, on the lighter side, probably $3.5 billion. On the higher side, probably close to $5 billion. And again, that's just my pure guessing based on what we've seen other teams go for and how, well, y'all know as well as I, inflation is still absolutely through the roof. So, I looked the other day and saw that the Minnesota Timberwolves and their sale from Glenn Taylor to Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lore finally went through, just finished up, so to speak, after their arbitration process. Glenn Taylor, I think, having maybe changing his mind a little bit, all that so to say. Read that it will eventually be sold and fully to Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lore. And that number was only $1.5 billion. And you think now, I'm sorry, that's cheap for an NBA franchise. And you think back to when they bought it, I believe it was around the COVID time. And, values were a little less back then, right? And you could probably buy something for a little less money as far as this. And now we talk about the new TV deal, NBA ratings going up, signing, all these new TV contracts, as we just mentioned. There's a lot of money in these franchises right now. And that's why I said I don't think it'll be hard for the Blazers at all to fetch at least $4, probably looking towards $5 billion. So, again, for any of those of you who are in that mix and would like to start the bidding process, there you go. You need to have at least $3 or $4 billion liquid in the bank to make happen. So, just monopoly money type folks. Absolutely monopoly money. But, nevertheless, that'll be something to keep an eye on over the next year. And, this obviously being, courtside one of our first chances to be able to discuss this since the news obviously broke. It was just a week ago that we had the lottery, and then obviously the news came after that the Blazers were looking to sell. And I think it's also telling that in the statement from Jody Allen, it kind of said that the Seahawks and the Sounders would not be affected. This is purely just a Trailblazers sale, and I think that it's going to be very interesting because it's early. It's very early. So we can't do nothing but speculate at this point. But eventually you're going to start to see some names come up, right? So I think back to, a couple years ago, not NBA necessarily, but when the Washington Commanders went up for sale. And you publicly heard it was Josh Harris, the guy who also owns the 76ers, and his group of people kind of duking it out against, a few other bidders, including, Magic Johnson, some other. So, you just started to see names come up, right? And that was the other thing, talking with Keith Smith, that was intriguing and unique to Boston when Boston just sold, and Boston sold for a record, over 6, I believe, for the Celtics. And, that was a largely Boston-based group of people coming together to buy this franchise. And that was one of the things I asked Keith is if this is so valuable in the sense of billionaires love to have these things to brag about to each other with, having a sports team, only 30 teams. It's true. So were there anybody in the mix for the Hornets or the Mavericks, for example, who, maybe came up just a little bit short and now, are hey, the Blazers are for sale. There's only so many people who are going to be in this mix as far as realistic options and people that, the NBA is going to vet, approve, and all those things. So I really don't think it's going to be a massive list of people. I think, like Keith said, you just have to hope, as the perspective of where we are, as, a fan, Rip City Radio and all that the Trailblazers look and find somebody who has a deep care for wanting to keep this team here, has a deep respect for what this, fan base has done for this franchise over, 50-plus years. And, say what you will, it's been a couple tough years for the Trailblazers, but Trailblazer fans are some of the best in the NBA. And you think about how well Moda Center's rocking and how Keith, when we talked to him, he's they need to get back to what they had been, a playoff contender. I understand that Portland is not the Boston Celtics or the Lakers as far as their championship banners hanging. But make no mistake, folks, the Blazers are still one of the better, just NBA teams as far as their history win-loss percentage. Historically, we even talk about these last couple of years, the Blazers historically as a franchise don't spend a lot of time in purgatory. They'll be down for maybe a couple years and they're right back in the playoffs. And again, as we mentioned, while not the rings to necessarily show, the Blazers have one of the better winning percentages of any team, since they've, come online relative to others. And, I think that's what you have to get back to, or is, Blazer fans, no matter what, will support a team that, is out there to compete, out there to win. And, I think with moves that could be made this summer, there's definitely the possibility that Portland could be in a much, I don't want to call it the Houston Rockets position, but I think they could make like a baby Rockets jump in the sense of like they have their young core guys that we really love, right? You have your Denny Avdias, you have your Tumani Kamaras, you have your Scoot Hendersons, you have your Shaden Sharps, you have your Donovan Klingons. And then from there, I still think the best move for this team is going to be jettisoning some of that salary that doesn't necessarily fit with the roster as we currently stand. And, we'll see what happens, purely speculatory here, but you talk about towards the end of the year how Jeremy Grant didn't play a ton. And you're talking about a guy who, has one of the bigger guarantees on the roster. And, objectively speaking, Jeremy Grant was signed to a contract under much different pretenses. We thought that Damian Lillard was going to be here much longer. The Blazers window was, at the time with that roster, was needed to be kept open. And Jeremy Grant would have been, a guy and was a guy who could have served as a quality playmaker for Dame. But now as we kind of flash forward a couple years and we see the growth of, Tumani Kamara and Denny Avdia, those guys play the same position that Jeremy Grant plays. And, it's not like you can, Avdia is maybe the one that you can slide into the backcourt because he's so great with the ball in his hands. But I don't know if necessarily that's the move either, because then you'd be moving, Shaden Sharp or Scoot Henderson or Anthony Simons out of the starting lineup potentially too. So as I kind of look at it and see, it really does seem like, Jeremy Grant might be that guy who they look to, just see what the market is for him this summer. We've heard the chatter about Anthony Simons, but even a guy like Anthony Simons, he still could fit into this roster moving forward. And, you think about Anthony Simons probably still being their best scorer, maybe even an argument for being their best overall all-around, player. I mean, there's a case to be made. I think Denny Avdia is quickly rising up that. But, Anthony Simons is still that guy that can go out and get you 25 when you need. Is a great sharpshooter. And you heard from Keith Smith how there were a ton of guys a ton of teams that would love to have Anthony Simons, whether that's in a starting spot or, a highly expensive, six man. He's valued, right? If shooting threes is valuable and Anthony Simons is a good scorer. But going back to that, there should be no pressure to necessarily move off of him. I mean, there's some. Sure, especially with Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp in the backcourt, but not nearly as much pressure as you have for like a Jeremy Grant, who has, several years and big expensive years left on their contract when you've got Tumani Kamara and Denny Avdia on really great deals. So definitely something to consider, keep in mind there. We'll take a quick break here on Trailblazers Courtside. When we come back, we're going to be talking to the Godfather, Dwight Jaynes. I want to get his thoughts on the lottery, the ownership change, and a lot more. You've got Trailblazers Courtside here on a Monday with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into Trailblazers Courtside here on a Monday evening. Appreciate everyone sticking with us. Very pleased to bring on our next guest here on Courtside, the Godfather, Dwight Jaynes. It's been a minute since I caught up with Dwight. Dwight, what's going on, man? Long time no talk. How you been?
Well, I'm fine, except I'm a little puzzled. The voice on the line said that it was hosted by Chris Burkhardt, and Chris Burkhardt would be here, but you're not Chris Burkhardt.
No, I said I do love my good buddy Chris Burkhardt, but no, Chris has got some OSA gigs tonight. So Chad gave me the rundown. He's like, "Hey, Brendan, need you to host a couple Rip City Drive shows for me next week." And by the way, you got Courtside too. So I was like, "Absolutely, let's do it." And knew right away I wanted to talk to you at some point during the week, Dwight. But glad to get you on Courtside. And just kind of starting off, like it was a week ago. We had the lottery; it's come and gone. Portland will have the number 11 pick. Considering how lucky Dallas got, is it kind of just like, what was your reaction to Portland being 11th?
Well, I expected 10 or worse. It's really hard to get that lucky, and obviously Dallas did and Portland didn't. But when you have odds like this, I mean, it's really hard to expect to do any better than that. And if you do better than that, you have a right to be very surprised, which I'm sure Dallas was. But I'm a old line conspiracy theorist, but I can't bring myself to believe that the lottery was rigged. I think that's way too complicated, and I don't think it was.
Yeah, no, I kind of have the same thoughts. I mean, I was on vacation in Vegas last week when the news dropped. I was watching the lottery poolside, and to see the amount of people that were shocked that the Dallas Mavericks jumped up, and then talking to our very own Sean Highkin, who was in the draft, in the lottery room itself, and then catching up with Keith Smith today, who was explaining, well, if you wanted to rig it, you would not only need all 30 teams on it, you would also need the private security that the NBA hires for the draft lottery to also be on it too. So again, I'm kind of with you where it's like it was funny. It is a pretty far out there where it's like, man, I don't know the odds of the Mavericks doing that after they traded Luka. It is a little on the nose, but I truly think it just so happened to be random.
Yeah, that's what I think too. It's unfortunate, really, and they didn't deserve it. I'm just really tired of the worst teams not getting a good pick, because that's the whole reason you have a lottery. That's what lotteries are for, is to give the worst teams the best picks. And that's what, I shouldn't say lotteries, that's what drafts are for. The
Right.
draft is to help out the lousy teams. And, we're not getting that out of this lottery. And I think it's my opinion is just drop it and let the worst teams tank all they want, but you won't get 10 or 12 teams tanking. You'll just get two or three or four maybe tanking. And if they want to do that, that's the bed they're making, and they'll sleep in it, because some of those teams don't get out of that hell for years and years. So
Right.
go ahead and do that. But at least some of these teams, like, I mean, Charlotte, how long do you have to be lousy before you
Right.
get a good pick? And, Utah is getting towards that area too. And Washington, my
Right.
goodness, it's just kind of a shame. And I hate to see it work out that way.
Yeah, no, I kind of have the same thoughts, Dwight. And you've obviously been around the NBA a long time, and even knew the process. I'm curious, just even before I was really this lottery that we're in now. Like I remember before when the odds for the top three were obviously a little higher, and then they've kind of flattened out odds a little bit. But was there ever a stretch when you were covering the NBA that you kind of felt like the system was better than it was now, or is this just the best bad they have?
Well, I recall, that what I recall the most was the old days when they had the Eastern Conference on one side and the West
Mm.
on the other, based on records, and they would have a coin toss to see which conference would go first. And famously, the Blazers lost the coin toss in that Michael Jordan year,
Hmm.
and that's why they ended up where they were, instead of possibly getting the first pick. In which case they would not have taken Jordan still, but they would have ended up with Hakeem
Sure. Yeah,
Olajuwon,
of course.
which would have been a pretty nice consolation prize.
Yeah, I mean it's just one of those things that like I wholeheartedly agree with you because obviously like Dallas respectfully they didn't plan their year to get Cooper Flag like that's what Danny Ainge
Yeah,
did, that's what
yeah,
the GM of the Wizards did, and honestly when I see this result, Dwight, like obviously I know there were a lot of Blazer fans who, maybe weren't the most thrilled that the team went on their winning streak that they did and, kind of got themselves out of the bot. But, like, imagine if you didn't have that, which is something very positive to hang on to going into next season, and then you ended up like the Jazz or the Wizards and moved to 5 or 6. I think Blazer fans would feel worse, would they not?
Yes, they would, and they'd have a right to. See, that's why I think not having the lottery, if you're willing to take that chance of just sort of burning a season to
Yeah.
the ground, then go ahead and go for it. If that's what you want to do. But the penalty on that is pretty severe. And I, these teams didn't need to tank to be as bad as they were. I mean, I saw them play,
Right.
and yeah, they may not have deserved to be the worst team in the league, but they're right there with them, and so I don't worry so much about those lousy teams fighting over the number one pick. That's fine with me. I just hate to see, all three of them end up outside the top three picks. That's just not right.
It's true. And I mean, again, you could sell me on like, this being the thing to keep the Mavericks fans from walking off a cliff, Dwight, because I honestly think that, if you're a Mavericks fan, like a legit Dallas Maverick fan, you probably felt pretty betrayed by, the whole Luka situation. So I do like, it's like, as much as I would have liked to see Cooper Flag here in Portland, and believe me, I did. It's like, Dallas isn't a place that I like. I'm like, okay, that's horrible. But like, to your point, I look at the teams who were objectively the worst this year in being the Jazz, the Wizards, and the Pelicans. And for them to be 5, 6, and 7, that's horrible for them.
Yes.
Like, considering, like you said, they threw away their season.
Yeah, and it's bad for the league too, Brendan. I think I think it's a bad look for the league, and you've sentenced those teams to being. Yeah, it's Groundhog Day next year. They're all going to be doing the same thing. They're almost in a position where they have to. And I understood with the Blade. Look, if you're not going to make the playoffs, might just as well be as bad as you can be to try and get a good pick, because the good pick is the only thing that's going to rescue you.
Absolutely. Catching up with Dwight Jaynes here on Trailblazers Courtside, talking some draft lottery. And to be honest, I could not be in more in agreement with Dwight. Is like, I'm not sitting here peddling conspiracy theories about this draft, but I think this lottery says that, things probably need to be shaken up and changed yet again. I don't know. I'm not a genius. I don't know what that looks like, Dwight. That's why I've been trying to, ask you and others like what a ideal situation would be. But in this particular case, like, the big market teams, I think it's a little different. Like these small market teams, like a Pelicans, like a Jazz, and I'll even consider the Wizards semi-small market for this argument. But like compared to like, you look at the top three, like, okay, Dallas won. Okay, fine. That's maybe one. The Spurs almost paired Cooper Flag with Wemby. And then, the 76ers, who tanked for 1 year, got to number 3. So it really is like one of those just, you throw your hands up at the mercy of like truly a lottery, Dwight. I'm kind of with you. I think there has to be a better way.
Yeah, no, it's merciless. It's really unfair, and I'm tired of it. It just, you look at those odds and you think, well, how often can it happen? Well, it can happen every year. I mean, long odds or not, it doesn't mean it can't go that same way again next year. And why have your league just be ruined by something like that? And for the people living in those cities, it's ruined. That whole year is just poisoned.
Right. It's hard. And we've seen it here in Rip City for a couple years, Dwight. Like, obviously the Blazers got lucky a couple years back, right? They did not have the third best odds and ended up jumping up to get Scoot Henderson, and famously were one ping pong ball away from Wembanyama. But we've also seen the Shaden Sharp year where they drop back, and this most recent year where they drop back. So it's that's been a couple, rough years to that point. And Portland's done a nice job of acquiring some talent, so you're not like in the true wasteland like some of these other teams. But nevertheless, I definitely agree with you, and definitely going to be curious to kind of see if there's any kind of scuttle about the NBA looking to adjust the lottery. Catching up with Dwight Jaynes here on Trailblazers Courtside. Dwight, I want to get your thoughts on something else, too, just as they got eliminated. But I know, obviously, you were someone who was keeping a close eye on David Adelman with the Denver Nuggets. Obviously, Rick Adelman's son was there on the interim basis. I found it kind of interesting post-game when Nikola Jokic was asked about it, and he kind of was very modest and was like, "Well, that's above my pay grade." When we all know if a franchise player really wants a coach, he can go and sell a coach. I think pushing the Thunder to 7 games. I think he definitely deserves a shot. What do you think?
I think definitely does. I think just getting to the second round was something of an achievement, given their lack of depth. And we've seen in all kinds of sports how the coach often has to pay the price for the front office not doing its job. And in Denver, Michael Maloney he already paid the price for the front office not getting any help for that team. And they had no bench to speak of and
Right.
no veteran players, nobody they could rely on coming in. And they just, over the last 2 or 3 years, they've done nothing. After they won a title, it's like, okay, we got our championship. Now we're just going to sit back and make money, and we're not going to worry about getting better and trying to win another one. And they paid the price for that. They just didn't have enough
Right.
to help the best player in the world win another title, and it's too bad. And um, I felt bad for David, but I think getting through the first round and then taking OKC to Game 7, and they didn't lose that series in Game 7. They lost it earlier when they surrendered 20-point leads in the fourth
Right.
quarter, and those were because they wore their players out. And
Right.
the way the game's being called now, it's so physical that teams without depth or teams that rely on one player doing a lot of their scoring, they're in real trouble now. This is going to be the era where you better get a good coach and get back to team basketball and start running some sets that work and get your players good shots and have enough players that the same guy doesn't have to take the shot all the time. Look what's happened to every team that's played Indiana
Right.
during these playoffs. They're just getting the heck beaten out of them. Indiana plays so hard
Mm-hmm.
that you get hurt when you play them. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Knicks hold up because they think they play hard too.
Right.
But we'll see. The tempo that Indiana plays at is a lot better tempo than what you see out of the Knicks. So I'm kind of interested to see how that series breaks down. And I like Indiana because Rick Carlisle is one great coach, and he's also a guy that believes in spreading the ball around, and he's got probably one of the few pass first point guards in the league. Halliburton doesn't really care how many points he scores. He wants to win the game, and he moves the ball for them. He gets the ball to shooters in the right spot. So I think they're kind of a throwback team, and I'm real interested in how far they go. I'd like to see them win it just to help bring that style of basketball back into the NBA.
No, 100%. And that was one thing I was talking about last hour is, I don't think Rick Carlisle is getting nearly enough credit. I mean, just kind of casually, ends his time in Dallas, goes up to Indiana, and just quietly goes about building. I mean, I think about a couple years ago when they were the team that got Pascal Siakam at the trade deadline. They made the move, trading Sabonis for Halliburton. That turned out to probably be a better trade for Indiana than it did Sacramento. So, I definitely am with you, and they've been definitely a breath of fresh air. And I think in a true sense, Dwight, it's like it is nice to know that somebody new is going to win this year. If you look at the Thunder and not consider the Sonics being their history, never a championship, same for Minnesota, and then on the other side as well. So that part is definitely exciting because it did kind of see like we, had a run of the kind of the same teams there for a while, but I still think it's kind of unfortunate that we had some major injuries these playoffs. I mean, not only Jason Tatum, not only Steph Curry, but then, you talk about if the Cavs weren't as injured to start that series against the Pacers, does that series change, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. And the other thing I like about Indiana, a couple of pretty good guys with Blazer ties. Kevin Pritchard
True.
being he's the president, and you got Chad Buchanan, who's the GM. Chad was great here in Portland. So was Kevin, and I like to see them succeed. They're good people. They did a good job here in Portland, and there was just too much impatience at the time. That same old thing that Olshey had to put up with about take the big swing. Let's go ahead and take the big. Well, yeah, okay. Take the big swing at what? And teams now are finding out that big swing isn't quite as beneficial as it was because of the second apron and the
Right.
salary cap implications of all that. So you're in a situation now. You're going to have maybe one, maybe two all-stars, and then play good team basketball with a bunch of other players who can play, and they're just not all-stars. And
Right.
that's going to be how you have to win. And Indiana is the shining example of that
Right.
right now. And then even the Knicks, you look at the Knicks, yeah, they got Carl Anthony Towns, and he shows up once night, and the next night maybe not. And Brunson is a really good player, but not, I wouldn't call him a generational superstar.
Sure.
And the teams left are all sort of like that. And so that's the era we're approaching, especially if they continue to call these games rough and tumble like they have been in the playoffs. You rely on one guy. It's like you're going to see more situations like we saw with Jokic,
Right.
where the officials just let some little 6'2" bald-headed guy go in and rough him up the whole game and grab him and push him and hold
Sure.
him and everything else. And they're not going to call fouls. So you're in real trouble.
Yeah, and to that point, Dwight, I think, you mentioned the Nuggets a couple years ago. Again, I know the finances were the finances and they were a little restricted, but you go back to the year they won the championship, they let Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown walk from that
Yeah.
championship team. And I remember, I don't know if they could have afforded to keep KCP, what he ended up getting paid in Orlando and all those things. But regardless, like to your point, you need to have those role players that don't make what 40, 50 million a year, because you can only have so many of those guys on your team. Like I still look at, to your point, like the Knicks are still one of the most fascinating salary situations to look at, because like 90% of their money is in like 6 or 7 guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and we'll see how long that lasts,
Right.
because you get toward that second apron, and it's not only the tax that you pay, but it's all the restrictions on what you can do, in terms of trades and aggregating salaries and all those things that really cripple you in terms of being able to improve your team. So it's going to be interesting moving forward. I think the owners push this a little further than they thought they were pushing it, and it might get modified at some point. But for right now,
Yeah.
we're in a situation where it's kind of you are what you are, and that's not great for the Trailblazers, because they're not in a position to add a lot of salary to what they have right now.
Right, and that actually leads us into our next couple questions. I'm just curious off the top of your head, Dwight. With the Blazers now having that 11th pick, it's nothing that you can say is 100% off the table to trade. Do you think they could attach that pick to one of the veterans, namely someone like Jeremy Grant, who doesn't really fit in the current timeline and has a pretty big guarantee and extended out kind of far? I mean, especially when you consider the future of this team is Tumani Kamara and Denny Avdia on the wings.
Well, I'll tell you what I keep hearing in the league, Brendan, and that is, if you want to trade Ayton, if you want to trade Grant, you're going to have to attach a pick. You're just
Interesting.
not going to get anybody to take that salary
Right.
and that player without giving them something else. And the something else is probably going to be a pick. Now, you'd like to get a pick back somehow. But again, see, it's like the picks they got from Milwaukee a few years back, and we're talking about 2030 and 2029, 2031. I'm an impatient guy. I don't know about taking picks that far in advance, because you just don't know. They might be able to turn Giannis into 2 or 3 really good players and not fall into the lottery or anything
Right.
like that. So what's that pick do? You're taking a pick that you don't have any idea what it's going to be worth. Now, if you can trade it for a pick next year, you got a pretty good idea how some of these teams are going to be next year. So, and they just haven't stashed picks
Right.
like OKC
No,
and
they
Utah and some of these other teams. Even Houston, they still got a pretty good stash left. And that's been the big mistake of the rebuilding, is they took veteran players back that they thought would be marketable, but so far they haven't been, and that's why they haven't been moved.
Right.
And so you've got a situation where it's going to be really hard to get that really good player. And I've always felt, to get that really good player here, you've got to do it in the draft.
I wholeheartedly agree, because I think the free agency, for Portland and free agency, we know it. I think everyone can argue about maybe the reasons or the semantics, but it is what it is as far as history goes. And I definitely agree with you in the sense of, like, I think I kind of expected Portland to be a little bit more like OKC was a couple years ago. Like, remember when OKC took on Al Horford from Philly when Philly's like, oh, this guy can't play anymore. And it turns out he's actually pretty decent. But, like they kind of were the salary dumping spot for a little while. And,
Yeah.
I think I would agree with you on that. But, Dwight, just as we're running out of time here on Trailblazers Courtside, I got to get your take on one more thing because we could definitely chit-chat about this for hours. I appreciate your time. But just the big news post-lottery was, day after, we get that press release from Jody Allen. What was your reaction to that? And, obviously we know nothing's going to happen overnight, but just your first reaction to the news that it was finally being done.
Well, my first reaction, having written the day before that it was time to do it.
There you go.
I was not surprised. Well, I guess I was surprised they finally took my advice, but it was definitely time to do it. They're holding out. They were holding out to see what their pick was, because if they could have come up with a number one pick in the draft, the franchise did have better value. Not by billions of dollars, but it would be worth more if you had a chance to draft that generational player that you knew for 5-6 years out, he's going to sell you out of every game you had. That kid would have sold season tickets, every one of them that you had to sell immediately. It wouldn't have taken 3 days to sell that thing out. And that's why they waited. But once that came by, there was really no other reason to wait to put it out there. In fact, I wouldn't even be surprised if there aren't already some offers that they had earlier that somebody might have made them that they're considering. I kind of thought this might take a year or two to happen, but I was told the other day by somebody who kind of knows stuff, and that is that the NBA ones are selling quicker now. And the only problem with that is hedge funds in some cases are interested in buying teams. And if you're selling to a hedge fund, it's going to take a lot longer because they have to vet everybody, pretty much everybody who's on that list of, possible owners, or as they call them in the NBA, governors.
Right.
And, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I also my assumption is it won't be somebody local because it never is.
Right.
It never has
There
been.
aren't a lot of billionaires in Portland or in Oregon either. Like, let's just be
No.
honest. Our industry here, we don't have billionaires. We have a few, but not many.
Yeah, and we're losing them as quick as
Exactly.
we would have ever gotten them. And not only that, the ones we do have, other than Phil Knight, they're not sports fans.
No.
They're not really interested in a project like this.
No, I mean, it is, if like I said, Dwight, I think not only the trail, I think Oregon State would like to see Jensen Huang, interested in sports more than he is, and things of that nature. But it's fascinating to me because, like you said, I remember when they put out the press release a couple years ago when they're like, well, it could take 10 years to solve the estate and those kind of things. So I don't think anybody was really expecting it. But the question I want to ask for you, Dwight, to kind of wrap it up here on Trailblazers Courtside, just because it got thrown out there and with the response that I've gotten from others, I think a lot of Blazer fans were instantly worried that a new owner could come in and look to move the team. But from the conversations I've had with, people close, people far, it really doesn't seem like anybody thinks the NBA and Adam Silver would allow that to happen. Do you agree?
I'm 99% sure that it wouldn't move.
Yeah.
There is that 1% in today's world. Look, Al Davis moved the Raiders wherever he wanted. And the NFL is a lot stronger organization than the NBA. And they couldn't stop Al from doing what he wanted to do. And the only thing that bothers me is that somebody there in the Blazer organization now, say Bert Cole, decides that he doesn't like Portland and he wants to stick it to him, and let's sell it to somebody who wants to move somewhere else. And that's the only fear I have. I don't expect that. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not predicting that. I think that's the only way, because most people looking at this would see Portland as a good market to go to. I just don't expect them to want to go to the Moda Center either. I expect some sort of suburban arena and a real estate play along with it. That's kind of what everybody's doing now, is buying up a lot of land and then building an entertainment district alongside it with hotels,
Do you
restaurants.
think could something like that work in a Portland-ish? Like, do you think that could be on the table for a new owner, like talking about a new arena or those kind of things?
Well, if you're spending that kind of money on a franchise, you certainly wouldn't be, you wouldn't worry about what it costs to build an arena because the real estate part of it pays for everything.
Right.
Not the real estate of the arena, but all those hotels, condos, apartments, retail centers, nightclubs, all that stuff does. And
Yeah.
that's the way everyone's going now.
Interesting.
Everybody is copying the Atlanta Braves model of
Right.
the battery out in right field. And all the real estate money, the Braves are just making a real estate killing off that and
Yeah.
running the team with it. And so that's kind of what I would expect. And frankly, Moda Center needs lots of renovations. It's in a neighborhood now that they're not happy with. Even the
Right.
Blazers aren't happy with it. You have the traffic problems of that freeway intersection of 94 and I-5 that are causing traffic nightmares at game time. So there's a lot of reasons to think about putting it somewhere else.
Interesting. Well, yeah. I mean, I would say, if you're that would be it'd be interesting because I've said for a while, couldn't you, like the Deer District, what Milwaukee has, Jurassic Park, what Toronto has. I think it'd be awesome if the Blazers could have something like that wherever they are, where it's like, hey, maybe you can't get a ticket. All right, we'll go watch outside with the 60-foot, Jumbotron kind of a thing or whatever it is. So I definitely see some intrigue there as well, too. Dwight, we'll go ahead and have to wrap it up here as we need to take a break. We went a little long, but I certainly appreciate you jumping on, man. It was great to catch up with you. It's been a minute, and maybe we'll have to catch up again sometime soon.
You bet. Good to be on with you, Brandon.
Thanks, Dwight. Dwight Jaynes, always love talking to the Godfather. Like I said, we went a little long there, but that's always great. I love talking to Dwight. He had so much good stuff to talk about. Might have to get him on later in the week, too, and continue the conversation. You've got Trailblazers Courtside. Final segment coming up next with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back into Courtside Monday. Final segment, just wrapping things up. Big shout out to Dwight James, the Godfather, for joining me last segment. So much good stuff from Dwight. I mean, it's also great to hear from another person who's been around the league a long, long time that says, yeah, 99.9% chance the Blazers are not going to move. But one thing that I found very fascinating in there is if a new owner came in, could they look to build a new Moda Center? Could they look to build it in a suburb, like Dwight was saying, like build a cool district with like apartments and bars and nightclubs and hotels? Like, oh man, that would make me mighty, mighty intrigued. Again, we're putting the cart way before the horse here, but like Dwight said, if you're going to spend $5 billion on a team, what's another billion? What's another billion after that, right? We're talking monopoly money here. So definitely entertaining and big shout out to Dwight James for joining us on Courtside. Again, we talked about a lot of different things today on Courtside, right? We didn't get a chance to get into the mock drafts, but we'll do that next time, maybe a little bit later on the Rip City Drive. A couple days I'm hosting this week. We'll maybe take a look at some mock draft prospects.